For a few quiet moments, forget everything waiting for you tomorrow. There are no emails to answer here, no glowing screens, no traffic drifting through an open window, no clocks urging you onward every few minutes. Instead, there is only a narrow village tucked gently into the English countryside sometime during the late 13th century, where the day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the slow arrival of light itself. If you had somehow wandered into this village before sunrise, the first thing you might notice is not what you could see, but what you couldn't. There is almost no artificial light, no street lamps, no glow-in-shop windows, no porch lights left on overnight, only the faint orange glow of a dying hearth behind a shuttered window where yesterday's fire quietly waits to become today's warmth. The moon hangs low above the fields. Nothing is rushing. Nothing feels impatient. The world seems content to wait. History has an unfortunate habit of remembering kings while forgetting the people who baked their bread. Tonight, we're going to spend our time with those people instead. England is still sleeping, and there are few places in history more peaceful than the English countryside in the few precious minutes before dawn. The first sound that truly belongs to the morning is not the rooster. Morning arrives gradually. Long before the rooster decides his opinions deserve public attention, the countryside has already begun whispering to itself. A pair of wood pigeons exchange soft, familiar calls from the branches of an ancient oak. If you were standing here with your eyes closed, you could almost map the landscape simply by following its sounds. A man walks along the narrow lane carrying 2 wooden buckets, suspended from a smooth ash pole across his shoulders. Fetching water is one of those ordinary tasks that almost never appears in great history books. Another chimney begins releasing a thin ribbon of pale blue smoke. Inside one modest cottage, yesterday's fire is being persuaded back to life. Breakfast itself is refreshingly uncomplicated. A coarse loaf baked yesterday still occupies pride of place upon the wooden table. Very little is wasted, not because thrift is fashionable, but because necessity is an exceptionally persuasive teacher. Soon, throughout the village, similar breakfasts quietly unfold, simple, familiar, entirely ordinary. And perhaps that is precisely what makes them remarkable. There is a curious sort of peace that exists only for a few minutes each morning. It arrives after the darkness has begun retreating, but before the business of the day remembers to announce itself. For the people of this little village, it is so ordinary that hardly anyone pauses to notice it. Centuries later, it may become one of the things we envy most. Without engines, aircraft, electrical transformers, or distant highways, silence behaves differently here. It is never complete, because nature has little interest in remaining perfectly quiet. But it is wonderfully uncomplicated. The breeze has a voice of its own, so does the stream. The branches of an old elm murmur softly whenever the wind changes direction, while somewhere beyond the village boundary, a flock of sheep begins to stir with the sort of sleepy determination familiar to anyone who has ever been expected to start work before they felt entirely prepared. The shepherd, fortunately, has learned that sheep rarely respond to motivational speeches. One by one, cottage doors begin opening. Not all at once. The village wakes the way the sunrise spreads across a field. Slowly, gently, and without feeling the need to impress anyone. An elderly woman steps outside carrying a small bundle of herbs gathered the previous afternoon. She hangs them beneath the overhanging roof where the morning air will continue drying them over the coming days. Bundles of rosemary, thyme, and sage sway gently beside the doorway. To modern eyes they might appear decorative. To her they are simply practical. The medieval household is filled with objects that perform more than one task. A stool is something to sit on until it becomes a stepladder. A wooden chest stores blankets, protects treasured belongings, and occasionally serves as a bench when unexpected visitors arrive. Even a simple cloak may spend the morning keeping its owner warm before finding itself carefully folded beneath someone taking an afternoon rest. Very little is owned. Almost everything is useful. That practicality extends to the buildings themselves. As daylight slowly strengthens, details hidden by darkness begin revealing themselves. The timber frames of the cottages are not perfectly straight. Some lean ever so slightly after decades of patient settling. Their oak beams bear tiny marks left by the craftsmen who shaped them years ago using broad axes rather than modern sawmills. If you were to run your fingers across the wood, it would feel textured and honest, each groove quietly reminding you that another pair of hands once stood exactly where you are now. Between those beams are panels made from woven branches coated with a mixture of clay, earth, and straw. When freshly applied, they would have appeared surprisingly neat. Years of wind, rain, and sunshine have given them softer edges and gentle imperfections that somehow make each cottage seem more welcoming rather than less. Nothing here is identical. Every family has repaired its home a little differently. One roof sags ever so slightly near the chimney. Another displays fresh bundles of thatch, where last winter's storms demanded attention. A third has climbing roses reaching upward with remarkable determination, apparently unconcerned that nobody invited them. Gardens are already beginning to awaken. Not grand gardens filled with ornamental flowers, but hard-working little plots that earn their place every single season. Cabbages push broad leaves toward the growing light. Onions stand in neat rows. Beans climb rough wooden poles. Near one doorway, several beehives sit quietly in the morning sunshine. The bees themselves have not yet become especially busy. Perhaps they are sensibly waiting for the day to warm a little. It is difficult to blame them. A child appears briefly in one doorway, still wrapped in a woolen blanket several sizes too large. He blinks into the cool morning light, notices that the day has already begun without requesting his permission, and disappears back inside. A moment later, a voice from within the cottage gently encourages him to return. History suggests the blanket loses the discussion. Nearby, the village dog has finally decided that remaining asleep is no longer compatible with his professional responsibilities. He wanders slowly along the lane, inspecting familiar doorways with great seriousness, before accepting a friendly scratch behind the ears from a passing farmer. Whether he's guarding the village or simply collecting breakfast opportunities remains delightfully unclear. Perhaps both. The smell of wood smoke now hangs gently above the cottages. Not thick enough to hide the village, just enough to remind everyone that fires are being lit, kettles are warming, and another ordinary day is gathering momentum. Soon, those fires will bake bread, warm porridge, and heat water, carried only a short while ago from the village well. But before breakfast appears, there is another familiar ritual taking place across almost every household: the simple act of preparing for work. For medieval England does not wake in a hurry. It wakes with purpose. And as the first true rays of sunlight finally spill across the narrow lane, illuminating weathered timber, dew-covered grass, and drifting chimney smoke, the village quietly takes its first collective breath. The day has truly begun. As daylight strengthens, colours that only moments ago seemed hidden begin quietly returning to the world. The fields, which had appeared almost silver beneath the moon, slowly reveal themselves as countless shades of green. Wildflowers tucked along the edges of the narrow footpaths emerge one by one, tiny splashes of blue, white and yellow that no gardener ever planned, yet somehow seem perfectly arranged all the same. Morning dew clings stubbornly to every blade of grass. Each droplet catches the growing sunlight for only a few fleeting moments before quietly disappearing, as though the countryside had briefly decorated itself with thousands of tiny pieces of glass. No one pauses to admire them, not because they lack beauty, simply because the people who live here have seen this quiet miracle almost every morning of their lives. It is one of history's little reminders that extraordinary things often become invisible through familiarity. Across the village another door opens. This time it belongs to the carpenter. He steps outside carrying nothing more than a wooden mug filled with yesterday's small ale, pausing beneath the doorway to stretch muscles that have grown accustomed to years of lifting timber. He doesn't rush. There would be little point. The wood waiting in his workshop has been patient enough to grow for nearly a century before finding its way beneath his tools. It can probably wait another minute. He looks toward the eastern sky, not because he's admiring the sunrise, although it is certainly worth admiring. He is judging the weather. Every trade depends upon it. Rain changes everything. A mason works differently after rain. A farmer plans differently. A thatcher becomes very interested indeed in whether dark clouds are approaching. Even washing freshly spun wool becomes a more optimistic undertaking when the sky remains clear. The carpenter takes one more sip from his mug before quietly disappearing into his workshop. Moments later comes the familiar sound of wood meeting wood. Not loud, not hurried, just the soft rhythmic tap of a craftsman preparing another ordinary day. Throughout the village similar sounds slowly begin joining one another. A latch lifts, a gate swings open, a chicken flutters noisily onto a fence post, apparently convinced that maintaining balance is much easier when accompanied by enthusiastic commentary. Several geese waddle confidently across the lane with the unmistakable air of creatures who believe they own the place. To be fair, very few villagers seem inclined to argue. Unlike chickens, geese possess a remarkable confidence entirely unsupported by their size. Children quickly learn to treat them with respectful caution. Adults usually arrive at the same conclusion. Near the edge of the village, smoke curls lazily from the baker's chimney. Unlike many of his neighbours, the baker has already been awake for hours. Bread waits for no one. Long before the first customer arrives, the heavy oven must already be hot enough to receive its first loaves. The warmth spilling from the bakery doorway is immediately noticeable. Outside, the morning air still carries a gentle chill. Inside, the oven has transformed the little building into one of the warmest places in the village. The smell arrives before anything else. Fresh bread has a curious ability to make almost every problem seem slightly more manageable. Warm flour, toasted grain, a faint hint of wood smoke lingering from the fire itself. Even someone with no intention of buying bread might find themselves walking just a little more slowly while passing the doorway. The baker hardly notices. He has already repeated these same careful movements thousands of times. A wooden paddle slides another row of loaves deeper into the glowing oven. The dough has risen beautifully. Soon their crusts will become deep golden brown while the soft centres continue quietly baking inside. There are no timers, no digital thermometers, only experience. Years of practice have taught the baker to recognize readiness through colour, smell, and the satisfying hollow sound made when a finished loaf is tapped gently underneath. It is knowledge passed from one pair of hands to another, rarely written down, almost never measured, simply learned. Outside, the village grows steadily busier. The narrow lane that only a short while ago belonged almost entirely to birdsong now welcomes neighbours greeting one another with cheerful nods and familiar smiles. News travels quickly here. Someone's cow has finally recovered from an illness. A cart from the nearby town is expected before midday. Old Thomas believes the weather will change by evening. Old Thomas believes many things. Occasionally he is even correct. No newspaper has yet arrived to challenge his confidence. Conversations are unhurried. Nobody glances at a watch. Nobody apologizes for being 2 minutes late because, quite simply, nobody knows whether they are. Time exists here in broader strokes, before sunrise, after breakfast, mid-morning, near noon, the ringing of the church bell, the lengthening shadows, the fading light. The day unfolds naturally rather than according to numbered hours. Perhaps that is why everything feels just a little less hurried. The villagers certainly work hard, exceptionally hard. But there remains a quiet difference between working with the rhythm of daylight and chasing the relentless precision of a clock. That rhythm can almost be heard now. The blacksmith's hammer joins the morning. The baker removes another loaf. A horse snorts impatiently while waiting to be brushed. Children's laughter begins drifting across the lane. The village, so peaceful only an hour ago, has not become noisy. It has simply become alive. And somewhere above it all, the first rays of full morning sunlight catch the weathered stone tower of the church, bathing it in warm gold while the cottages below remain partly wrapped in gentle shadow. For just a few moments, the church seems to greet the sunrise before anyone else. Soon enough the bell will follow, and with it another chapter of the day will quietly begin. For a little while longer, the church bell remains silent. Its stillness is almost comforting. Everyone in the village knows it will ring eventually, just as surely as the sun will continue climbing into the morning sky. There is no mystery about it, and perhaps that certainty is part of its quiet reassurance. Some things happen exactly when they should. The seasons, the sunrise, the harvest, the returning swallows, the ringing of the village bell. Life here depends upon those dependable rhythms far more than upon precise minutes. The church itself has stood watch over the village longer than almost anyone can remember. Even the oldest villager can only repeat stories told by grandparents who themselves heard the same stories from generations before them. Its weathered stones have witnessed baptisms, weddings, funerals, harvest celebrations, harsh winters and joyful summers. Children who once chased one another around its churchyard have grown old enough to watch their own grandchildren do exactly the same. The building changes very little. The people change constantly. There is something strangely comforting about that. A pair of swallows suddenly dart across the open sky with astonishing speed, twisting and turning so effortlessly that they seem less interested in flying than simply enjoying the privilege of being able to. For centuries, their arrival has quietly announced that warmer days are returning. Nobody consults a calendar. The birds have already done that. Along the lane, the village blacksmith finally opens the wide wooden doors of his workshop. The heavy hinges groan with the familiar complaint of old iron performing honest work. Inside, the workshop is still wrapped in cool shadows. The forge itself sits quietly for the moment, waiting to become the hottest place in the village before the morning is much older. The blacksmith pauses for a moment before beginning, not because he is uncertain, quite the opposite. His movements are so familiar that they require almost no thought at all. He reaches for a stack of carefully split charcoal. Not every piece, only the right pieces. Years of experience have taught him to judge fuel with nothing more than a glance. Too small, and the fire burns away too quickly. Too large, and it becomes unnecessarily stubborn. The forge rewards patience every bit as much as strength. Within moments, tiny flames begin licking their way through the charcoal. The first wisps of smoke curl upward before disappearing through the opening in the roof. Soon, the workshop will echo with the steady rhythm of hammer striking glowing iron. For now, however, there is only the gentle crackling of a fire finding its confidence. Across the lane, another craftsman begins his day, the cooper. His trade is one many modern people rarely think about, yet almost every household depends upon his work. Without sturdy wooden barrels, there is nowhere to safely store ale, flour, salted meat, grain, or countless other necessities. The cooper runs one hand along a smooth oak stave before setting it carefully beside several others already arranged upon his workbench. To anyone passing by, they appear to be little more than pieces of wood. He sees an entire barrel waiting to emerge. There is a certain satisfaction in skilled hands recognizing possibilities invisible to everyone else. Not far away, a young apprentice hurries across the village carrying a bundle of tools nearly as long as his arm. He walks quickly, not because he is late, simply because young legs have a habit of believing every journey should be completed at twice the necessary speed. His master watches him approach with quiet amusement. There is no need to remind him to slow down. Life has an excellent record of providing that lesson eventually. The first customers now begin appearing outside the bakery. Nobody forms an orderly queue. There is no painted line upon the ground suggesting where one should stand. Neighbours simply gather together, exchanging greetings while warm loaves continue emerging from the oven. Someone comments that the morning feels cooler than yesterday. Another insists the coming harvest looks promising. A third quietly mentions hearing wolves somewhere beyond the forest several nights ago. Whether this is entirely accurate remains uncertain. Village stories have always possessed a remarkable ability to become slightly larger each time they are repeated. By the time the tale reaches the far end of the lane, the wolves have almost certainly doubled in number and become considerably more interested in everybody's sheep. The baker wisely says nothing. He has learned that bread rises far more reliably than rumours. The smell drifting from the doorway grows richer with every passing minute. Golden crusts crackle softly as fresh loaves cool upon rough wooden shelves. One little girl cannot help staring. Her mother notices immediately. They both know the bread is still far too hot to eat. Patience, once again, proves itself one of medieval life's most frequently practiced virtues. It is difficult to hurry a loaf. Trying generally ends with burnt fingers. The little girl decides waiting is probably the wiser choice. Mostly. The village now carries an entirely different feeling than it did before sunrise. The stillness has not vanished. It has simply been replaced by purpose. Every doorway seems to contain someone preparing for the hours ahead. Every lane leads toward another familiar task. Every greeting reminds neighbours that they belong to something larger than themselves. This is not a wealthy village. Its cottages are modest, its possessions are few, its people work extraordinarily hard. Yet there is richness here all the same. It lives in familiar faces, shared routines, well-worn paths, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of honest work beginning, and the quiet certainty that, whatever the day may bring, no one will greet it entirely alone. At last, the bell rings, not loudly enough to startle anyone, not dramatically enough to interrupt the morning. Instead, the sound rolls gently across the countryside with the quiet confidence of something that has done exactly the same job for generations. A single deep note drifts out across the fields, then another, then another. The sound travels much farther than anyone standing beneath the tower might imagine. It slips between cottages, crosses gardens, follows winding lanes, echoes across grazing fields, and finally dissolves somewhere beyond the distant hedgerows. For many villagers, they have heard this sound almost every day of their lives. Children barely notice it. Older villagers scarcely pause their work. The bell is not remarkable. It is reassuring. It tells everyone that the day is unfolding exactly as it should. Today, like yesterday, has officially begun. There is something rather comforting about living in a world where time arrives not through vibrating watches or chiming telephones, but carried gently upon the wind. The church bell asks nothing of anyone. It simply reminds the village that another morning has been generously given. The lane now fills with movement, not hurried movement, purposeful movement. A woman balances 2 baskets across her arms while carefully avoiding an ambitious goose that appears convinced baskets should be inspected before continuing any farther. The goose receives a look that suggests this conversation has occurred before. It is unlikely to be the last. 2 brothers guide a sleepy cow toward a nearby pasture. The older boy walks confidently. The younger one spends considerably more time watching butterflies than cattle. The cow notices. It quietly wanders in precisely the opposite direction. Life has always been an excellent teacher, although occasionally its lessons involve chasing livestock through wet grass before breakfast. Nearby, a pair of elderly neighbours pause beside a low stone wall. Neither appears especially busy. Neither seems in a particular hurry to end the conversation. Modern life has become remarkably efficient at measuring time. Medieval life, by contrast, often measures relationships. A neighbour is not someone living 3 houses away. A neighbour is someone who helped repair your roof after last winter's storm. Someone who watched your children while you harvested grain. Someone who quietly arrived carrying soup when illness visited your home. Communities like this survive because people understand something wonderfully simple. One day you help someone else, another day they help you. The arrangement has served humanity surprisingly well. The narrow lane continues leading toward the open fields beyond the village. Already several farmers are making their way along it with tools resting comfortably across their shoulders. They walk together, discussing weather, soil, and the condition of last year's wheat, with the sort of thoughtful seriousness usually reserved today for international affairs. In fairness, successful crops are considerably more relevant to their lives than international affairs. One farmer stoops briefly to pick up a small stone from the path before tossing it gently into the hedgerow. No grand reason. He simply knows that someone else's cartwheel will thank him later. Such tiny acts rarely appear in history books. Perhaps they should. History is often built from moments too ordinary for anyone to record. As the village slowly empties toward the surrounding fields, Another part of the community quietly comes to life. Children. Some are already helping with chores. Others carry small bundles of firewood gathered from yesterday's walk. A little girl carefully scatters grain for the chickens. She performs the task with complete concentration, only to discover that chickens remain wonderfully uninterested in orderly behaviour. They rush toward breakfast from every possible direction, flapping wings and clucking enthusiastically as though each bird has independently discovered food for the very first time. It is difficult not to smile. The chickens certainly aren't. The village dog watches the entire performance with mild curiosity. He considers becoming involved, thinks better of it, returns to supervising absolutely nothing in particular from a comfortably sunny patch beside the lane. It is by all appearances exhausting work. The warmth of the morning now settles comfortably across the village. The last traces of dew disappear from the grass. The smell of fresh bread mingles with wood smoke. Open windows carry the sound of quiet conversation into the lane. Everywhere you look, ordinary life unfolds. Not spectacular, not dramatic, simply human. And perhaps that is why it has endured for so many centuries, because long before history remembered the names of kings, explorers, and generals, there were villages like this. People who rose before sunrise, shared breakfast around a wooden table, helped neighbours without expecting applause, measured wealth in healthy harvests rather than bank accounts, found comfort in familiar routines, laughed at stubborn geese, watched the seasons come and go, loved their families, buried their loved ones, welcomed new children into the world, and quietly built the foundations upon which history itself would eventually stand. Our journey through this village has only just begun. The sun has climbed above the rooftops, the ovens are warm, the workshops are alive with steady work. The fields beyond the village are waiting. So, with the morning now fully awake, let us leave the cottages behind for a little while, and follow the farmers into the countryside, where most of medieval England earns its living beneath the open sky. Leaving the village is a surprisingly quiet affair. There are no stone gates to pass beneath, no grand walls marking where one world ends and another begins. The cottages simply become fewer. Gardens give way to open ground, and before long the narrow lane stretches ahead between wide fields that seem to roll gently toward the distant hills. Behind you the village continues waking. The blacksmith's hammer still rings softly through the cool morning air. The smell of fresh bread lingers for a while before the breeze gradually carries it away. The church tower, now touched fully by the rising sun, slowly becomes smaller with every step. Ahead lies the countryside. To the people of medieval England, this is where life truly happens. A kingdom may be governed from castles, laws may be written in great halls, merchants may grow wealthy inside busy towns, but breakfast begins here, lunch begins here, tomorrow's bread begins here. Almost every meal enjoyed by every family in the village owes something to these fields. They are not perfectly straight. Modern farming has taught our eyes to expect endless geometric precision, fields drawn almost ruler straight across the landscape by machines guided with astonishing accuracy. The medieval countryside possesses no such ambition. Every field bends gently around ancient trees, follows the natural rise of the land, avoids stubborn patches of stone, and quietly accepts that streams have little interest in respecting property boundaries. There is something wonderfully human about their irregularity. Nature drew the first outline. People simply learn to work with it. A pair of horses pull a wooden plough across the earth with patient determination. The farmer guiding them speaks only occasionally. The horses already know what is expected. They have walked this same field so many times that they could almost find the end without assistance. Almost. One of them pauses briefly to investigate an unusually interesting clump of grass. The farmer smiles to himself before giving the reins the gentlest of reminders. Breakfast, it would seem, has already been eaten. The work can continue. The soil turns slowly beneath the plough. Dark, rich earth rises to the surface, carrying the unmistakable scent that follows freshly opened ground. It is a smell many people still recognize today after spring rain or an afternoon spent gardening. Deep, cool, clean. A reminder that beneath every path and every village lies the same patient earth waiting to grow another season's harvest. Not every field contains grain. Some support sheep that wander lazily through the morning mist with an air of complete contentment. Others hold grazing cattle, whose greatest ambition at this particular moment appears to involve finding whichever patch of grass looks marginally greener than the one they are already standing upon. One cow lifts its head as the farmer passes. They regard one another for a thoughtful moment. Neither appears especially impressed. Both continue with their morning. A narrow footpath crosses one corner of the field. It has existed for so long that nobody remembers who first walked it. Perhaps generations of children have worn it into the grass while carrying water or chasing one another home before supper. Perhaps travelling merchants preferred this route because it remained dry after heavy rain. Perhaps both. Many medieval paths begin not with careful planning, but with repeated choices. One person walks across a meadow, another follows. Years become decades, decades become centuries. Eventually the land quietly accepts the decision. The path remains. Near a weathered hedgerow, an elderly farmer kneels beside several young shoots just beginning to emerge from the soil. He studies them with remarkable patience. At first glance he appears to be doing almost nothing. In reality he is reading the field. He notices tiny changes invisible to almost everyone else, the colour of the leaves, the dampness of the ground, whether insects have arrived earlier than expected, whether last week's rain soaked deeply enough into the soil. It is knowledge earned one season at a time. No university awarded it. No book fully captured it. The countryside itself became the teacher. His grandson stands nearby, trying very hard to appear equally thoughtful. After several moments of serious observation, he quietly points toward a ladybird climbing one of the leaves. The old farmer looks over. His expression softens into a smile. Both discoveries, in their own way, are worth noticing. A gentle breeze moves through the wheat growing in the neighbouring field. The stalks sway together like the surface of a calm green sea. No two plants move in exactly the same way, yet together they create one slow, rolling motion that seems almost hypnotic to watch. It is easy to understand how someone could pause for several minutes without realizing any time had passed at all. Somewhere overhead, a skylark begins singing. The tiny bird is almost impossible to spot against the brightening sky. Its song, however, fills the countryside, bright, cheerful, endlessly energetic. The farmer never looks up. He has heard skylarks every spring for longer than he can remember. The visitor from another century, on the other hand, might stand perfectly still, smiling quietly while trying to discover where such an impossibly large sound could be coming from. The bird naturally has no intention of making the search easy. It continues singing from somewhere invisible above the fields, apparently delighted by the mystery. There is no audience, no applause, only another ordinary morning in medieval England, and somehow that is more than enough. As the morning grows warmer, the countryside seems to stretch awake along with it. The last ribbons of mist lift gently from the lower meadows, dissolving so quietly that, unless you happen to be watching closely, you might believe they had never been there at all. Sunlight settles across the fields in broad golden bands, warming the damp earth one careful inch at a time. Nothing in nature appears to hurry. The flowers open when they are ready. The bees begin their work when the air has grown warm enough. Even the spiders, whose delicate webs still sparkle with tiny beads of dew, seem content to wait for the day to gather itself properly before becoming too ambitious. It is a pace that feels almost unfamiliar to modern life. Today we speak constantly about saving time. Here time is not something to save, it is simply something to live. A narrow stream winds lazily through one corner of the meadow, hardly wider than a man is tall. Its water is astonishingly clear. Small pebbles scattered along the bottom remain perfectly visible beneath the gentle current, while tiny fish dart between patches of waving water plants before disappearing beneath the shade of overhanging willow branches. A young farm boy kneels beside the bank, trailing one hand through the cool water. He's been asked to fill a small wooden bucket. Judging by the amount of time he has already spent watching insects skate effortlessly across the surface, the bucket is currently receiving considerably less attention than the insects. His father notices. Without raising his voice, he simply clears his throat. The boy smiles sheepishly. Some lessons require lengthy speeches. Others require only a father who has perfected the art of clearing his throat. The bucket is filled with remarkable efficiency. Nearby, two women walk slowly along a narrow path carrying woven baskets over their arms. Inside are freshly gathered herbs, eggs wrapped carefully in soft cloth, and several rounds of cheese prepared earlier in the week. Nothing appears especially luxurious, yet everything inside the baskets has taken time. The herbs required tending, the hens required feeding, the milk required collecting before dawn. The cheese demanded patience while it slowly matured. Almost every object in medieval life carries invisible hours within it. Even the simplest meal represents the work of countless hands. That quiet truth is easy to overlook when standing before a table already prepared. The women continue chatting as they walk, not loudly, not hurriedly. Conversation here rarely competes with the landscape. It simply becomes another gentle sound carried upon the morning breeze. They speak of a neighbour whose daughter has recently become engaged. They wonder whether this year's apples might arrive a little earlier than usual. One mentions that her youngest son has once again outgrown his shoes. The other laughs softly. Children, she observes, have always possessed an astonishing talent for growing immediately after new clothes have been made. Some traditions, it seems, survive every century. Beyond them, several sheep graze peacefully beneath the watchful eye of an elderly shepherd. He leans comfortably upon a long wooden staff polished smooth by years of faithful service. Very little escapes his notice. A lamb wandering too far from the flock, a gap beginning to appear beneath an old section of fencing, clouds gathering slowly beyond the western hills. To an unfamiliar visitor, the hillside might appear perfectly still. To the shepherd, it is full of conversation. Every movement tells him something, every sound has meaning. A distant bleat, the rustling of tall grass, the warning call of a crow circling high above. His work is far less about chasing sheep than it is about quietly understanding them. One particularly curious lamb wanders toward the footpath before stopping to inspect your boots with great seriousness. It sniffs once, twice. Apparently deciding that you are neither edible nor especially interesting, it returns to the flock without further comment. Its investigation has been thorough. Its conclusions appear final. The shepherd smiles. "It likes you," he might have said, had he been inclined to explain sheep. Fortunately, sheep rarely require much explanation. They remain delightfully committed to being sheep. The breeze freshens ever so slightly. It carries with it the scent of crushed grass, wild mint growing near the stream, damp soil, and the faint sweetness of flowering hawthorn lining the hedgerows. The air itself feels alive, not crowded, simply full. It becomes wonderfully easy to understand why people here know every season so intimately. Spring has one scent, summer another. Autumn arrives carrying apples, smoke, and fallen leaves. Winter smells of cold stone, damp wool, and fires burning from dawn until long after darkness has returned. There are no calendars hanging inside these fields. The countryside keeps its own, and almost everyone who lives here has quietly learned how to read it. By now, the sun has climbed high enough that the morning chill has become little more than a pleasant memory. Cloaks that felt entirely sensible an hour ago are folded neatly over shoulders or draped across low fences while work continues beneath a sky that promises a fair day. A light breeze continues to wander across the countryside with no particular destination in mind. It ripples through the barley, stirs the leaves of ancient oak trees, and sends tiny white clouds drifting lazily overhead, each one apparently content to let the world revolve beneath it without becoming overly involved. It is difficult to feel rushed in a landscape that has absolutely no intention of hurrying for anyone. Near the edge of one field, a young woman kneels among rows of broad beans, carefully removing weeds that have quietly appeared during the past several days. There is nothing dramatic about the task, no great discovery, no sudden excitement, simply patient work. She knows that if the weeds remain, they will steal precious water and nourishment from the crop, so one by one they disappear into a growing pile beside her basket. History rarely applauds such moments, yet without thousands of ordinary mornings exactly like this one, kingdoms would eventually discover that even castles become rather uncomfortable places once everyone has run out of food. Not far away, two older farmers pause beneath the shade of an enormous oak, whose branches have almost certainly been providing welcome shelter long before either man was born. One produces a small wooden flask, the other accepts it with quiet gratitude. They sit for only a few minutes, just long enough to rest tired legs before returning to the day's work. Neither man feels the need to fill every silence with conversation. People who have worked beside one another for years often become remarkably comfortable saying very little at all. Sometimes companionship requires words. Sometimes it simply requires sharing the same patch of shade. A robin lands upon a nearby fence post. It tilts its head first one way, then the other, studying the freshly turned earth with obvious professional interest. The farmers continue talking. The robin continues hunting. Everyone, it seems, has arrived for work this morning. Further along the lane, an old cart creaks slowly toward the village. Every wooden wheel announces its arrival several moments before the cart itself appears around the bend. The sound is wonderfully distinctive, not unpleasant, simply familiar. The driver sits comfortably upon a rough wooden seat, gently encouraging the horse with quiet words rather than sharp commands. The horse, having travelled this route more times than either of them could possibly remember, seems perfectly capable of finding home without assistance. Indeed, there are moments when one suspects the driver is merely accompanying the horse rather than directing it. The cart carries sacks of grain covered carefully with heavy cloth to protect them from any unexpected shower. A small bundle of freshly cut willow branches rests near the back. These will eventually become baskets, hurdles, or fencing. Very little growing in the medieval countryside lacks a future purpose. An observant visitor soon notices something else. There is remarkably little waste. Broken tools are repaired, clothing is patched, wood is reused, animal bones become tools. Ash from yesterday's fire may help nourish tomorrow's garden. Nothing here speaks of endless abundance. Instead, everything reflects quiet resourcefulness, not because people enjoy making life difficult, because generations have learned that throwing useful things away is a luxury few can afford. Even the hedgerows seem busy. Bees disappear into blossoms before emerging dusted lightly with golden pollen. Butterflies drift lazily from flower to flower with an elegance that appears almost effortless. Somewhere beneath the tangled branches, a family of field mice goes about its own business entirely unnoticed by the farmers passing only a few steps away. The countryside is full of lives unfolding simultaneously. Most never cross paths. A distant woodpecker begins tapping steadily against the trunk of an old ash tree. The rhythmic knocking echoes softly through the still air. Somewhere else another answers. Whether they are discussing territory, breakfast, or simply enjoying the acoustics of particularly satisfying timber remains known only to woodpeckers. Human beings have been confidently explaining animal behaviour for thousands of years. Animals have rarely felt obliged to confirm our theories. The lane bends gently around another meadow. Beyond it, several children are gathering fallen branches beneath the watchful eye of an elderly grandmother. The task seems simple enough. Collect only wood that is already dry. Leave the damp branches behind. Carry manageable bundles rather than heroic ones. Heroic bundles have an unfortunate habit of becoming impossible bundles halfway home. One small boy ignores this advice almost immediately. He proudly lifts a bundle nearly as large as himself. He manages 3 determined steps before the entire collection slides untidily back onto the ground. His grandmother smiles without the faintest hint of surprise. Apparently this lesson has also been taught for generations. The second attempt is considerably more successful. Sometimes wisdom arrives disguised as a smaller bundle of firewood. As the children disappear between the trees, the countryside settles once more into its gentle rhythm, the steady scrape of hose against soil, the distant call of birds overhead, the soft whisper of grain moving together in the breeze, and beneath it all, almost too quiet to notice unless you pause for a moment, the comforting sound of an ordinary day unfolding exactly as countless ordinary days have done before it. As the morning steadily approaches its middle hours, the landscape begins to change in ways so subtle they are almost impossible to notice from one minute to the next. Shadows shorten. The dew has long since surrendered to the warmth of the sun. The air, cool enough to make every breath visible only a short while ago, now feels pleasantly mild against the skin. The countryside has settled into its day's work. There is a comforting rhythm to it all. The farmer guides his horses to the end of another furrow, before turning them with practised ease. The shepherd slowly circles his flock without ever seeming to hurry them. The women carrying baskets disappear toward the village while others emerge to replace them. Nothing stands still, yet nothing feels frantic. It is rather like watching the tide move across a shoreline. The movement is constant, only the pace is patient. One field farther along, several men work together repairing a low stone wall that has finally decided to surrender a few of its rocks after enduring decades of wind, rain, and winter frost. The oldest of the group crouches beside the scattered stones, turning each one slowly in his hands before selecting precisely where it belongs. To an impatient observer, the process might appear unnecessarily slow. To him, speed is the quickest way to ensure the wall will need repairing again next spring. A well-built wall is a conversation with the future. Someone else, years from now, should be able to walk past without giving it a second thought. That is success. The younger men lift the heavier stones while the older farmer quietly adjusts each one with remarkable precision. Experience, it seems, has a habit of replacing strength with judgment. Neither is especially useful without the other. Nearby, wild poppies sway gently among the grasses, brilliant red against an ocean of green. No one planted them. No one waters them. They simply arrive each year with cheerful confidence, decorating the edges of fields already busy feeding the village. Nature occasionally insists upon beauty even when people are occupied with practical matters. The practical and the beautiful are not nearly such distant cousins as we sometimes imagine. A pair of ravens crosses overhead. Their shadows glide silently across the wheat before vanishing as quickly as they appeared. For a brief moment one farmer pauses to watch them. Then, just as quietly, he returns to work. Medieval people were deeply familiar with the natural world, not because they studied it in classrooms, because they lived inside it every day. The weather was not something discussed at the end of a television broadcast. It was quite literally tomorrow's plans. A week of rain could delay planting. An early frost might threaten an entire harvest. A long spell of warm sunshine could mean the difference between a comfortable winter and a difficult one. The sky deserved attention because the sky mattered. Even today, if you spend enough time outdoors, you begin noticing small details you once overlooked. The smell before rain, the direction birds choose to fly, the curious silence that sometimes settles over a landscape just before a summer storm arrives. People living in medieval England noticed these things because paying attention was simply part of everyday life. Not every prediction proved correct, of course. An old shepherd may confidently declare that tomorrow will be dry because the swallows are flying high. The following afternoon he might find himself sheltering beneath the nearest tree, while insisting that the birds were probably distracted. Fortunately, swallows are polite enough not to argue. Beyond the fields, the woodland stands quietly waiting. Its deep green canopy appears almost mysterious from a distance, hiding winding paths, ancient trees, and the countless creatures already going about their own busy morning. Many villagers gather fallen branches there. Others hunt. Children search for berries when the season is right. To a traveller unfamiliar with the area, the forest might seem vast. To the villagers, it is simply another neighbour. Like every neighbour, it deserves respect. It also occasionally borrows hats whenever the wind becomes mischievous. Near the edge of the woodland, a squirrel races effortlessly along the branch of a towering oak before leaping confidently to another tree several feet away. It completes the jump without hesitation. The watching farm boy quietly attempts to imagine doing the same. After several thoughtful moments, he wisely concludes that admiring squirrels is considerably safer than imitating them. It is perhaps one of the better decisions he will make all morning. The breeze freshens once more. The wheat bends gracefully before slowly standing upright again. Clouds drift lazily overhead, casting broad moving shadows that slide across fields, hedgerows, and distant cottages like silent ships sailing over a green sea. For just a moment, the entire countryside seems to breathe together. The horses, the sheep, the birds, the farmers, the trees, the streams, each playing a small part in a rhythm that has repeated itself for centuries. It is easy to understand why so many medieval people measured time not by clocks, but by familiar sights. When the sun reached that oak tree, when the shadows touched the lane, when the church bell rang again, when the swallows returned. Life possessed its own quiet calendar, written not on parchment, but upon the landscape itself. Before long, the village bell will ring once more. This time it will not signal the beginning of the day. Instead, it will gently remind everyone that morning has almost slipped away. Work will pause, hands will be washed, bread will once again appear upon wooden tables. The busiest part of the day is still ahead, but first, even the hardest workers deserve a little rest. There are few sounds more welcome in the medieval countryside than the church bell announcing the approach of midday. Not because work is finished, far from it. For most villagers, the hardest hours still lie ahead. Yet even the most diligent farmer understands a simple truth. An empty stomach accomplishes very little. The bell carries gently across the fields once more, its deep notes softened by distance until they seem less like commands and more like friendly reminders. Almost instinctively, people begin looking toward home. Some gather tools, others wipe soil from weathered hands onto linen tunics that have long since accepted the impossible task of remaining clean. A shepherd whistles quietly. His dog, who has spent much of the morning pretending not to pay attention, immediately appears from somewhere among the flock, with an expression suggesting he had been supervising everything perfectly all along. The shepherd says nothing. The dog says even less. Professional relationships often thrive upon mutual understanding. The lane leading back toward the village grows steadily busier. Farmers exchange quiet greetings as they pass one another. A young apprentice proudly carries a bundle of freshly shaped wooden pegs made during the morning. He holds them rather carefully, as though transporting priceless treasures. In a way, perhaps he is. A well-made peg may one day help support a roof beneath which children are born. Families gather and old stories are told beside a winter fire. Great buildings often depend upon surprisingly modest pieces of wood. As the cottages come back into view, thin columns of chimney smoke once again greet returning workers. The village smells different now than it did at sunrise. Earlier there had been fresh bread and damp earth. Now richer aromas drift through the narrow lanes, onions slowly softening in iron pots, herbs simmering in broth, freshly baked oatcakes cooling near open windows, a hint of roasted garlic carried unexpectedly upon the breeze. No restaurant advertises today's menu. The entire village quietly does it for them. Outside one cottage, an elderly woman removes a heavy pot from above the hearth, using an iron hook polished smooth by decades of careful hands. Steam rises into the cool interior before curling lazily toward the smoke hole overhead. The contents are simple, a thick pottage made from barley, onions, beans, and herbs gathered from the garden. Perhaps a little bacon if fortune has been particularly kind. Perhaps not. Recipes here are wonderfully flexible. The pot receives whatever the season is willing to provide. Yesterday's leftovers often find themselves invited back for today's meal with remarkable enthusiasm. Nobody objects. In fact, many villagers quietly suspect the stew tastes even better after spending another night becoming acquainted with itself. The wooden table is small. Its surface bears the tiny cuts, scratches and polished patches left by countless meals shared over many years. If tables possessed memories, this one could probably tell stories lasting considerably longer than today's dinner. Children drift inside, one by one. The youngest arrives first, not because she has been called first, simply because she's already identified the direction from which lunch is most likely to appear. Her older brother follows only after carefully washing his hands in a bucket of cool water beside the doorway. His mother notices. She nods approvingly. Good habits, much like sturdy boots, are often encouraged while people are still young enough to grow comfortably into them. Across the room, a cat has positioned itself with extraordinary strategic brilliance beside the table. It has no intention of begging. At least, not immediately. Experience has taught it that patience frequently results in considerably larger rewards. The cat watches every movement with quiet concentration. Somewhere between the slicing of bread and the serving of stew, opportunities have been known to arise. The family gathers. No one speaks for the first few moments, not because conversation is unwelcome, because everyone is genuinely hungry. There is something deeply satisfying about honest work followed by simple food. The first spoonful warms chilled hands as much as empty stomachs. The thick broth carries the sweetness of onions, the earthiness of barley, and the gentle fragrance of herbs growing only a few yards from the doorway. Nothing about the meal is extravagant. Nothing needs to be. Luxury and satisfaction have never been exactly the same thing. Outside, the village has grown noticeably quieter. Not silent, simply softer. Many workshops have paused. The blacksmith's hammer rests for a while. Even the horses seem grateful for the opportunity to stand beneath the shade of the nearby trees while flies buzz lazily through the warm afternoon air. The village itself appears to exhale. One little boy finishes his meal rather quickly, before looking hopefully toward the remaining piece of bread resting upon the table. His mother notices immediately. She smiles. So did everyone else, her expression seems to say. The bread survives. For now. The boy accepts defeat with admirable dignity. It is perhaps the smallest tragedy to occur anywhere in England today. Lunch in medieval England is not an occasion to impress the neighbours. There are no elaborate centrepieces arranged upon the table, no polished silver catching the sunlight, no carefully folded napkins waiting beside every bowl. The meal has only one ambition: to prepare everyone for the afternoon. In that respect, it succeeds admirably. The wooden bowls themselves bear the marks of long and faithful service. Tiny scratches run in every direction across their surfaces, each one earned honestly through years of daily use. One bowl has a slightly darker patch where generations of careful washing have polished the wood almost as smoothly as glass. Another leans ever so slightly to one side when placed upon the table. Nobody finds this particularly troublesome. Everyone simply knows which bowl prefers a flatter section of the table. Every household possesses little objects like these, not valuable enough to lock away, too familiar ever to replace. A wooden spoon rests beside each place. They are surprisingly different from one another. One has a longer handle, another is carved with a simple pattern near its base. One has clearly been repaired after developing a crack many years earlier. It continues serving faithfully, apparently refusing to accept retirement. The family cat, meanwhile, has decided that patience has been rewarded sufficiently. It rises gracefully from its sunny corner and strolls beneath the table with all the quiet confidence of a creature entirely convinced that lunch has always been a shared responsibility. A tiny fragment of bread eventually finds its way to the floor. Whether by accident or through an act of remarkable generosity, remains politely uninvestigated. The cat accepts the offering with dignified gratitude. The arrangement appears satisfactory to everyone involved. Outside, the warmth of the day has coaxed open the shutters of nearly every cottage. Fresh air drifts gently through the little rooms, carrying with it the scent of nearby gardens where lavender, rosemary, and mint sway lazily beneath visiting bees. Laundry hangs between wooden posts, moving softly at the breeze like the sails of tiny white ships. The village has become brighter, more colourful. The pale limestone of the church catches the afternoon sunlight. The timber-framed cottages cast shorter shadows than they had only a few hours before. Even the dusty lane seems warmer beneath the growing sun. An elderly man sits quietly upon a simple wooden bench outside his doorway. His meal has already finished. His afternoon's work can wait another few minutes. He removes his cap, closes his eyes, and simply listens. It is a skill almost forgotten by many of us. Listening, not for anything in particular, simply allowing the world to speak for itself. He hears the distant murmur of conversation drifting from another cottage, the rhythmic clucking of hens scratching determinedly beneath a hedge, a bee humming busily among flowering herbs, the faint laughter of children somewhere beyond the well. Nothing extraordinary, everything precious. A little farther down the lane, two women stand beside the communal oven discussing bread. Not politics, not royal affairs, bread. One wonders whether yesterday's loaf stayed fresh longer because the weather had been cooler. The other insists that adding slightly more rye has always produced a stronger crust. Neither appears especially interested in settling the debate permanently. Some conversations exist simply because they are pleasant to have. A passing neighbour contributes an opinion of his own before continuing toward the blacksmith. Within moments the discussion has expanded to include 3 entirely different methods of storing flour. Human beings, it seems, have always enjoyed offering advice when somebody else is baking. Near the village well, several younger children invent a game using nothing more than smooth stones collected from the stream. No expensive toys, no complicated rules. One child tosses a pebble into a circle scratched in the dirt. Another attempts the same. The competition becomes remarkably serious. The prize remains entirely imaginary. The excitement, however, is wonderfully real. Their laughter echoes between the cottages before disappearing toward the open fields. The adults glance over. Most smile. One grandmother quietly pretends not to notice when her grandson steps just a little too close to winning by adjusting the circle with his foot. History may remember great military strategies. Grandmothers have been identifying suspicious behaviour from 50 paces for considerably longer. The afternoon sun climbs steadily higher. Before long the fields will once again fill with workers. The blacksmith's hammer will return. The carpenter's tools will resume their familiar rhythm. The shepherd will gather his staff and whistle softly for his faithful companion. But for these few gentle moments, the village enjoys something surprisingly rare, A pause, not idleness, not laziness, simply the quiet understanding that every day benefits from a moment spent catching one's breath before the work begins again. And perhaps that small pause, more than anything else, reminds us that even 800 years ago, people understood the value of slowing down. No one announces that lunch is over. There is no whistle, no factory siren, no alarm sounding from a pocket watch. Instead, the village returns to work the same way it woke that morning. Gradually, one person stands, another finishes the last mouthful of stew. Someone else rinses a wooden bowl with a little water before placing it upside down beside the hearth to dry. Outside, a door opens. Across the lane, another closes. Within only a few minutes, the quiet pause gently dissolves back into the steady rhythm of ordinary life. If mornings belong to beginnings, afternoons belong to persistence. The excitement of starting something new has faded. Now comes the slower satisfaction of continuing. The blacksmith draws the first glowing length of iron from the heart of his forge. It shines a brilliant orange, almost too bright to look at directly. Tiny sparks leap into the air before disappearing long before they reach the floor. The metal rests upon the anvil for only a heartbeat. Then, tap, tap, tap. The first careful strikes are almost delicate. Anyone expecting the dramatic crashing blows so often shown in films would probably be surprised. Real craftsmanship rarely begins with violence. It begins with precision. Each strike lands exactly where the blacksmith intends. The iron slowly changes beneath his hammer, yielding little by little, as though remembering it was once part of the earth itself. Only after the shape has begun to emerge do the heavier blows follow. The ringing sound travels far beyond the workshop. Across the village people hear it without giving it much thought. It is simply part of the afternoon, rather like bird song, or the church bell, or children laughing somewhere near the well. Some sounds become so familiar that communities quietly build themselves around them. The blacksmith pauses, returning the iron to the glowing coals. There is no impatience in his movements. Hot iron cannot be hurried. Cold iron refuses to cooperate. The trick, learned only through years of practice, is working with the metal rather than against it. There is an odd lesson hidden there. Many things become easier once we stop insisting they obey our timetable. Across the lane, the carpenter has reached a similar understanding. A rough oak plank rests upon two sturdy trestles, while curls of pale wood gather around his boots like fallen autumn leaves. The scent of freshly cut oak fills the workshop, warm, clean, almost sweet. It is the smell of houses not yet built, tables not yet eaten upon, cradles not yet rocked. Every shaving falling to the floor hints at something waiting to exist. The carpenter runs one calloused hand along the smooth surface he has just finished planing. His fingertips discover tiny imperfections invisible to the eye. He works them away with patient strokes. The apprentice watching nearby leans closer. "What are you looking for?" he might be tempted to ask. The answer would probably disappoint him. Everything. The grain, the knots, the tiny places where the wood still wishes to become smoother. A good craftsman notices details most people never realize are there. It is not perfection he seeks. Wood refuses such unreasonable expectations. It twists, it shrinks, it expands. It reminds human beings from time to time that nature is perfectly willing to have opinions of its own. The carpenter has long since learned not to argue. Outside, a pair of women sit together repairing clothing beneath the shade of an apple tree. Needles move steadily through worn linen while lengths of thread disappear almost magically into neatly repaired seams. One shirt has already lived several different lives. Originally it belonged to a father, then an older son. Now it is being altered once again for the youngest child in the family. The cloth has become softer with every passing year. Its colour has faded slightly beneath countless washings and long afternoons beneath the summer sun, yet nobody considers it old. It is simply trusted. There is a quiet dignity in repairing things. Modern life often celebrates the new. The medieval village quietly celebrates the useful. A torn sleeve is not an excuse for replacing a garment. It is simply tomorrow's sewing. One of the women pauses for a moment, holding the shirt at arm's length to inspect her work. She smiles with quiet satisfaction. The seam is almost invisible. Only someone who knew exactly where to look would ever notice it. She folds the shirt neatly before placing it into her basket. Some of the finest work is completed so well that nobody realizes it was ever necessary. Above them, apples sway gently among bright green leaves. Most are still small, most are still hard. They have many weeks of growing ahead before anyone begins thinking seriously about harvest. Patience once again quietly governs almost every corner of medieval life. Very little worth having arrives in a hurry. Bread must rise, cheese must mature, fruit must ripen, children must grow. Even the great oak shading the women began life no larger than an acorn. The tree never rushed. Perhaps neither should we. By the middle of the afternoon, the character of the countryside has changed once again. The morning carried promise. Midday brought a welcome pause. Now the day settles comfortably into the long, satisfying hours when steady work quietly transforms effort into accomplishment. The sunlight has mellowed. Gone is the brilliant white glare of late morning. Instead, a warmer golden light spreads across the fields, softening every hedge, every tree and every weathered stone wall until the landscape seems almost painted rather than merely seen. Even the air feels different. The warmth rising gently from the earth carries the rich scent of grain, crushed clover, and freshly cut hay drying beneath the sun. A swallow darts effortlessly across the lane before disappearing over a nearby meadow. Another follows only moments later. They fly so quickly that the eye struggles to follow them, twisting through the air with astonishing precision, while catching insects almost invisibly. To the villagers, their graceful movements barely deserve a second glance. To someone visiting from another century, they might provide endless entertainment. Remarkable things often become ordinary simply because we see them every day. At the far end of one field, several labourers work together, gathering hay into neat stacks before the weather has an opportunity to change its mind. Haymaking is one of those jobs that rewards cooperation. One person cuts, another turns the drying grass, another gathers it, another stacks it carefully. So rainwater, should it arrive unexpectedly, will run down the sides rather than soak into the centre. There is quiet intelligence hidden inside these simple-looking tasks, knowledge accumulated one summer after another. One older farmer pauses beside a finished haystack, placing both hands upon his hips while looking thoughtfully toward the sky. He studies the clouds for several moments. High above, white clouds drift peacefully across the blue. Harmless enough, yet he notices something else. Farther west, almost too distant for anyone else to see clearly, darker clouds have begun collecting above the hills. Not enough to cause concern, not yet, but enough to encourage everyone to keep working while the weather remains agreeable. Living this close to nature teaches a person to notice tomorrow, arriving while everyone else is still enjoying today. A little farther along the field, two young brothers have been given the important responsibility of carrying drinking water to the workers. The older brother walks carefully, concentrating on every step. The younger brother possesses rather different priorities. He's become completely fascinated by a bright green grasshopper sitting proudly upon a fence post. The insect remains perfectly still. The boy leans closer. So does the grasshopper. For one wonderfully quiet moment they appear equally curious about one another. Then, without warning, the grasshopper launches itself into the tall grass with astonishing speed. The boy laughs. The bucket sloshes. Fortunately, most of the water survives the adventure. His brother sighs with the patient resignation known only to older siblings throughout history. Some relationships, it seems, have changed remarkably little over 800 years. Near the hedgerow, wild blackberries are beginning to form among long-arching brambles. They are still small, still hard, still defiantly sour. Children inspect them anyway. Hope, after all, has never been especially concerned with calendars. An elderly woman passing along the path notices their disappointment. "Come back in a few weeks," she says with a smile. "The berries are in no hurry. Neither should you be. It is excellent advice for fruit, perhaps for life as well." Not far away, the village miller stands beside the gently turning water wheel that powers his mill. Unlike the dramatic rushing rivers often imagined in paintings, this stream moves with quiet determination. Its steady flow has become a dependable partner. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year. The great wooden wheel turns slowly, each paddle dipping into the current before rising again with comforting regularity. Inside the mill, enormous millstones rotate with deep, steady purpose, transforming grain into flour through patience rather than speed. The sound is low and constant, not loud enough to dominate the countryside, just enough to remind nearby villagers that another essential task is quietly being completed. Without the mill there is no flour. Without flour there is no bread. Without bread, well, the baker would probably become the least popular man in England. Fortunately, everyone continues doing their part. The farmer grows the grain. The miller grinds it. The baker transforms it. Each depends completely upon the others. The village is not simply a collection of cottages. It is a web of quiet cooperation. Perhaps that is why it functions so well. No one truly stands alone. The mill is one of the busiest places in the village, although it rarely feels hurried. People arrive one cart at a time, one sack at a time, one conversation at a time. Nobody expects to be served in exactly 5 minutes. Nobody checks a watch. In truth, very few people would know the precise time even if they wished to. They simply know the day is moving along exactly as days have always done. A farmer unloads 2 heavy sacks of barley from the back of his cart. He lifts them carefully onto his shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who has repeated the same movement thousands of times. Strength, after all, is rarely built in a single heroic effort. More often it is earned one ordinary day at a time. The miller greets him by name, not because customer service manuals recommend doing so, because they have known one another for 20 years, perhaps longer. In villages like this, familiarity is woven into daily life. Everyone knows whose roof leaked during last winter's storms. Everyone remembers whose daughter married in the spring. Everyone knows which cow has an unfortunate habit of escaping through perfectly respectable fences. News travels without newspapers. Reputations travel even faster. The farmer brushes loose flour from one of the empty sacks before leaning comfortably against the doorway. He and the miller begin discussing the coming harvest. Neither claims to know exactly what the weather will do. Experience has taught both men to treat certainty with quiet suspicion. The conversation drifts from grain to rainfall, to whether the apples seem unusually plentiful this year, before eventually arriving, as conversations between neighbours so often do, at absolutely nowhere in particular. Neither man appears disappointed. Some conversations exist for the pleasure of keeping company. Not every discussion requires a destination. Inside the mill, sunlight slips through narrow openings in the timber walls, filling the dusty air with long, golden beams. Tiny particles of flour drift lazily through the light, rising and falling almost invisibly with every movement of the great wooden machinery. The entire room carries the comforting scent of fresh grain, warm, nutty, clean. If bread has a birthplace, this is surely one of them. Outside once more, a young girl walks slowly beside her grandmother, carrying a small wicker basket. Inside rests a single round loaf still wrapped in linen. The basket is hardly heavy. The responsibility, however, is enormous. This is her first time carrying the family's bread home by herself. She grips the handle with complete concentration. Each careful step seems to declare that absolutely nothing unfortunate will happen to this loaf while it remains in her care. Halfway home, she pauses, not because she is tired, because the smell is almost impossible to ignore. Fresh bread possesses remarkable persuasive abilities. She gently lifts one corner of the linen cloth, only for a second, perhaps two. A warm cloud of comforting fragrance escapes immediately. The crust crackles softly as it cools. She smiles. The bread has passed inspection. Her grandmother notices the entire performance without saying a word. Some traditions deserve quiet encouragement. Others deserve pretending not to have seen them at all. The village lane grows busier again. A cooper rolls a newly finished barrel toward the brewer's yard. Its wooden hoops catch the afternoon light, while the barrel itself moves with surprising grace over the uneven ground. Behind him, two boys immediately begin debating whether they could fit inside it. Experience suggests the cooper has answered this question before. No. The reply arrives before either boy has spoken aloud. Apparently certain ideas become visible long before they become verbal. The boys exchange disappointed glances. The barrel continues safely on its journey. Somewhere nearby, a rooster suddenly announces himself with spectacular confidence. He's been unusually quiet throughout most of the afternoon. Now, for reasons known entirely to himself, he has decided that everyone should once again be reminded of his existence. Several hens continue scratching the ground without showing the slightest interest. The rooster remains undeterred. Self-confidence has never required unanimous agreement. Near the churchyard wall, several elderly villagers sit together upon a low stone bench, enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun. One man carefully whittles a new handle for a garden tool. Another slowly repairs a fishing net. The conversation flows as steadily as the nearby stream. Stories begin, drift, return, occasionally repeat themselves. No one minds. The best stories are often improved by familiarity. One gentleman pauses thoughtfully before beginning a tale everyone else has almost certainly heard before. The listeners smile anyway. Sometimes the pleasure lies not in discovering what happens next, but in hearing an old friend tell it once again. Above them, the church tower watches quietly over the village exactly as it has done since dawn, patient, unmoving. Its shadow now stretches a little farther across the grass than it did an hour earlier. The afternoon is advancing, almost unnoticed, almost effortlessly, and somewhere, just beyond the fields, the first hints of evening are already beginning their slow walk toward the village. There comes a point during every afternoon when the entire countryside seems to pause, not because anyone has stopped working, but because the light itself has changed. It is difficult to describe exactly when it happens. No one looks up and announces it. No church bell marks the moment. Yet somehow everyone feels it. The bright confidence of midday slowly gives way to the softer glow that belongs only to the later hours. The shadows beneath the hedgerows deepen. The leaves of the great oak trees seem richer in colour. Even the dust rising gently from the lane catches the sunlight differently, floating through the warm air like tiny specks of gold before settling quietly back to earth. The farmers notice, not consciously perhaps, but years spent working beneath open skies have taught them to measure the day by light rather than numbers. There are still hours of work remaining, yet evening has already begun its slow approach. A horse drawing a small wagon stops beside a shallow stream to drink. The driver loosens the reins slightly, allowing the old animal to lower its head into the cool water at its own pace. Neither appears impatient. Both have earned a few moments' rest. Nearby, dragonflies skim effortlessly across the surface, their delicate wings flashing silver each time they catch the sun. They dart so quickly that they seem almost impossible to follow. One moment they are hovering above the reeds, the next they have vanished entirely. Nature, it would seem, enjoys reminding us that not every beautiful thing intends to remain still long enough to be admired properly. Further along the stream, a young shepherd sits upon a smooth boulder, while his flock grazes peacefully nearby. His lunch has long since disappeared, but one small apple remains tucked safely inside his satchel. He removes it, turning it thoughtfully in his hand before taking the first crisp bite. The sound echoes surprisingly clearly in the quiet countryside. Perhaps it is because so little competes with it. No engines, no distant sirens, no constant hum of electricity, just bird song, the breeze, the trickle of water, and somewhere across the fields the faint rhythmic tapping of a carpenter finishing another day's work. The shepherd finishes his apple before tossing the core into a nearby patch of long grass. Nothing remarkable, no grand statement about nature, simply the ordinary habits of people who lived closely alongside the land and rarely imagined waste in quite the same way many of us do today. His dog, stretched comfortably beneath the shade of an ash tree, opens one eye just long enough to confirm that the apple was not intended for him. Satisfied with this unfortunate discovery, he returns immediately to sleep. One suspects he has become exceptionally skilled at conserving energy for moments of genuine importance, such as barking enthusiastically at absolutely nothing after sunset. Back near the village, the blacksmith places the final horseshoe of the afternoon into a wooden crate beside his workbench. He wipes the back of one hand across his forehead, leaving behind a faint streak of soot that will almost certainly remain unnoticed until someone points it out later. His apprentice notices immediately. He wisely chooses silence. There are many forms of intelligence. Knowing when not to comment upon another person's face is among the more useful. Across the lane, The baker steps outside carrying several empty flour sacks. He hangs them over a simple wooden rail where the afternoon breeze can shake loose the last stubborn traces of flour before tomorrow begins the entire process once again. His work, like nearly everyone else's, follows a comforting rhythm. Prepare, bake, sell, clean, repeat. Not monotonous, reliable. There is a difference. As the afternoon continues, the village slowly begins drawing itself inward again. Workers return one by one from the surrounded fields. A woman carries a basket now noticeably lighter than it had been that morning. The cooper rolls his final barrel into storage. Children who spent much of the afternoon inventing games among the hedgerows now wander home with dusty boots, grass-stained knees, and expressions suggesting the day ended considerably sooner than they would have preferred. It always does. The lane grows busier, not with strangers, with neighbours. The same familiar faces encountered that morning. Only now they carry the pleasant weariness that follows honest work completed well. One man tips his cap as another passes. A young girl proudly presents a handful of wildflowers gathered during the walk home. An elderly couple strolls slowly toward their cottage, saying very little. After 40 years together, silence has become another language they both speak fluently. Above them, a flock of starlings sweeps across the sky in one graceful movement before settling among distant trees. The village watches without really watching. Some spectacles become so familiar that people forget how extraordinary they truly are. The afternoon is ending. The busiest hours have passed. Soon fires will be lit once more. The smell of supper will drift through the cottages. Doors will close against the evening air, but before darkness returns, the village still has a few gentle hours left to enjoy beneath the golden light of a medieval afternoon. There is a particular kind of light that arrives only during the final hours of the afternoon. It is softer than the brightness of midday, warmer than the pale light of morning. The sunlight no longer falls straight down upon the village, but slips gently through the branches of ancient oak trees, stretches across the rooftops, and paints the timber-framed cottages in shades of honey and amber. Even the dust rising from the village lane appears almost beautiful. It hangs briefly in the air after every passing cart, glowing softly before settling once more upon the earth. The day's work has not yet ended, but its hardest hours have quietly passed. One by one, familiar figures begin returning home. The shepherd appears first, his flock moving patiently ahead of him, as though every sheep has suddenly remembered exactly where supper is waiting. The village dog trots proudly beside them. Whether he believes he has personally directed every sheep home remains uncertain. Judging by the confidence in his walk, one strongly suspects he does. The sheep seem willing to indulge him. There is no harm in allowing someone to feel important after a long day's work. Near the baker's shop, the final loaves have already been sold. Only the comforting smell remains. Warm crust, toasted grain, a faint sweetness lingering in the cooling air. The baker sweeps flour from the worn stone floor with long practiced strokes. Nothing is wasted. Even the smallest crumbs are gathered carefully before the doorway is closed for the evening. Tomorrow, before sunrise, the entire process will begin again. Routine has a remarkable way of becoming comforting when it is built upon honest work. Further along the lane, the blacksmith pours a final bucket of water over the forge. A sharp hiss fills the workshop as steam rises into the evening air. The fire, which glowed with such determination only moments ago, reluctantly surrenders its heat. The workshop suddenly feels quieter, almost thoughtful. The blacksmith rests both hands upon the handle of his hammer for a moment, looking around the familiar room, the tools hanging neatly upon the wall, the anvil polished by countless years of work, the faint smell of charcoal still drifting lazily toward the open doorway. There is satisfaction in finishing a day's labour, not excitement, not triumph, simply the quiet knowledge that today's work has been done well. Outside, children reclaim the village. All afternoon they've remained politely occupied while adults tended fields, workshops and livestock. Now the lanes once again belong to laughter. A group of boys races toward the stream carrying carefully carved wooden boats, no longer than a man's hand. Each insists his vessel will travel faster than all the others. None appear especially interested in conducting a scientifically controlled experiment. The boats are placed gently upon the water. For several wonderful moments they drift together through the current. Then one catches against an overhanging branch. Another spins slowly in circles. A third continues confidently downstream. Its proud owner immediately declares victory. The others question the result with remarkable enthusiasm. Competitive discussion among children, it seems, has remained wonderfully consistent throughout the centuries. Nearby, several girls gather wildflowers along the edge of a meadow. They weave tiny crowns from daisies and buttercups with astonishing patience. One little girl proudly places her finished crown upon her younger sister's head. It immediately slips over one eye. Both dissolve into laughter. The flowers, fortunately, prove considerably more cooperative on the second attempt. Their grandmother watches from a nearby bench while quietly mending a linen apron. Every now and then she glances up, smiling to herself before returning to her needle. There is no need to interrupt such moments. Some memories deserve to unfold without assistance. The village well has become lively once again. Buckets rise and fall steadily as evening water is gathered before darkness arrives. The conversations sound different now, less concerned with work, more relaxed. Someone mentions a calf born only yesterday. Another wonders whether the travelling merchant might return before next week's market. An elderly gentleman confidently predicts another spell of fine weather. His neighbours nod politely. Experience has taught them that weather enjoys surprising even the most confident forecasters. Still, there is something reassuring about hearing someone speak as though tomorrow has already agreed to cooperate. As the sunlight continues slipping lower toward the horizon, the church tower casts an ever-lengthening shadow across the village green. Children occasionally leap across it, as though crossing an invisible river. A cat, having spent much of the afternoon asleep upon a warm window-sill, stretches with theatrical elegance before beginning its evening patrol. Every fence, every doorway, every familiar corner deserves another careful inspection. The mice, one imagines, have been hoping this particular shift would begin considerably later. Above the rooftops, swallows continue their graceful dance through the cooling air. Soon they too will disappear for the evening. But for now, the village still belongs to daylight. And daylight in medieval England is never taken for granted. As the afternoon slowly surrenders to evening, the village seems to draw itself a little closer together. Throughout the day, everyone has been scattered across fields, workshops, orchards, and winding country lanes. Now, almost without anyone giving the matter much thought, those same people begin drifted home. Not in great crowds, just one family here, a lone shepherd there, a farmer leading 2 patient horses along the familiar track toward the stable. The distance between neighbours grows smaller with every passing minute. Smoke once again begins rising from the cottage chimneys. One thin ribbon, then another, then another. Within only a few moments the rooftops seem to breathe together, each chimney adding its own pale thread to the cool evening air, until they merge into a soft blue haze drifting lazily above the village. The smell changes too. Earlier the air carried freshly turned earth and warm hay. Now richer aromas quietly replace them. Onions gently frying in rendered fat. Fresh herbs dropped into simmering broth. Bread warming beside the hearth. The unmistakable fragrance of wood smoke curling upward through thatched roofs. If mornings belong to possibility, evenings belong to comfort. One cottage door remains open, while an elderly grandfather patiently splits kindling into neat bundles beside a chopping block polished smooth by decades of use. His grandson watches with complete fascination, not because splitting wood is especially exciting, because almost everything adults do appears worthy of close scientific observation when one is 7 years old. The old man notices. Without saying a word, he hands the boy several much smaller sticks. The child arranges them proudly into a tidy pile. The grandfather nods with exaggerated seriousness. Excellent work! The village has gained another assistant, at least until something considerably more interesting catches the young man's attention, which happens approximately 20 seconds later when a butterfly wanders past. Some apprenticeships begin slowly. Not far away, a young mother kneels beside a tiny vegetable garden behind her cottage. The day's heat has left the soil slightly dry, so she pours a little water around the roots of beans and cabbages growing in careful rows. She pauses for only a moment, brushing a loose strand of hair behind one ear, before gently pinching away several yellowing leaves. No one applauds. No audience gathers to admire her work. Yet months from now, when those vegetables help feed her family through colder weather, today's quiet attention will have mattered. Many of the most important jobs are the ones almost nobody notices while they are happening. The village carpenter walks home carrying little more than his tools. His shoulders are tired. His hands bear fresh sawdust despite brushing them clean several times throughout the afternoon. He passes the baker. Both men nod. Neither stops. There is no need. Tomorrow morning they will almost certainly exchange another greeting. Some friendships become so dependable they require remarkably few words. The lane itself has changed since sunrise. Boot prints left in the soft earth now overlap one another in every direction. Tiny wagon tracks weave between them. The footprints of children appear suddenly, disappear just as mysteriously, then reappear somewhere entirely unexpected after an obvious detour involving puddles, curiosity, or both. History books rarely mention footprints. Perhaps they should. If every step tells the story of someone returning home after an ordinary day's work, then the lane has become one of the busiest books in England. A cool breeze stirs the leaves overhead. The sound is wonderfully gentle, not the fierce rushing of storm winds, simply thousands of leaves quietly speaking together. Somewhere among the branches a robin sings one final evening song before settling for the night. The melody lasts only a minute or two. It feels somehow longer. Perhaps peaceful moments naturally stretch themselves inside our memories. Near the edge of the village green, several older boys have challenged one another to see who can throw a smooth stone the farthest across the stream. Each attempt is carefully measured, not with rulers, with enthusiastic disagreement. One insists his travelled farther because it landed beyond the willow tree. Another claims the first throw curved unfairly with the current. A third quietly announces himself the winner before anyone else finishes arguing. It is difficult to imagine a competition judged with greater confidence or fewer official regulations. Their debate continues cheerfully as they walk home together. None appears especially concerned about determining the actual victor. Perhaps spending the afternoon with friends was the victory all along. The church bell remains silent. Its next ringing will come later. For now, the village enjoys the brief space between work and supper. It is neither busy nor idle, neither noisy nor quiet. It simply exists exactly as it has for generations, breathing, settling, waiting for evening to unfold one gentle moment at a time. As the sun sinks lower, the entire village begins to glow, not brightly, softly. The warm amber light spills across thatched rooftops and weathered timber walls, settling gently upon gardens, fences, and winding lanes, till everything seems wrapped in the quiet warmth of a summer evening. The long shadows of the cottages stretch lazily across the village green. A few chickens scratch near the edge of the lane, searching the dust with the serious concentration of scholars examining ancient manuscripts. The rooster, having spent much of the day offering opinions no one requested, now stands proudly upon a fence post as though personally responsible for the successful arrival of evening. No one thanks him. He appears satisfied all the same. Near the well, the last buckets of water are drawn for the night. The rope creaks softly as it lowers into the cool darkness below. A splash rises from somewhere deep inside the stone circle. Then comes the slow, steady pull as water returns to the surface, glimmering faintly in the fading light. The woman lifting the bucket pauses to rest it against the well's edge before carrying it home. It is heavy. Water always is, especially at the end of a long day. Across the lane, supper fires are being coaxed into stronger flames. Inside cottages, families gather around hearths while simple evening meals begin to take shape. Pottage thickens in iron pots. Bread is sliced. Cheese is placed upon wooden boards. Herbs are crushed between careful fingers before being stirred into broth. Nothing is elaborate. Nothing is wasted. Everything has its place. The day's work has made even the plainest food feel welcome. A father returns from the fields with dust upon his boots and tiredness in his shoulders. Before stepping inside, he pauses for a moment beside the doorway. He looks back across the village, across the rooftops and gardens, across the fields beyond. Perhaps he's checking the weather. Perhaps he's thinking about tomorrow's work. Or perhaps he's simply standing still because after a long day, standing still feels rather wonderful. Inside, a child calls for him. The moment ends. He ducks through the low doorway and disappears into the warm glow of the cottage. One by one, doors begin closing. Not all at once. Nothing in the village happens all at once. But gradually the lanes grow quieter. The carpenter's tools have stopped. The blacksmith's forge has cooled. The baker's oven rests until morning. The mill wheel turns more slowly now, its deep wooden rhythm softening as the day fades. Even the children begin returning home, though some do so with the reluctant steps of people who believe evening has arrived several hours too early. This opinion is not new. Children have been disagreeing with bedtime for as long as there have been beds, blankets, or responsible adults nearby to suggest them. The church bell rings once more. Its sound moves gently across the village, over the green, through the lanes, across the fields, and toward the darkening trees beyond. This ringing feels different from the one that welcomed morning. The morning bell stirred the village awake. This one gathers it inward. It does not hurry anyone. It simply reminds every household that daylight is fading and the long work of the day is nearly done. Above the rooftops, the first evening star appears. At first it is easy to miss. Then, as the sky deepens from gold to violet, it shines more clearly. A few villagers notice it while fastening shutters or carrying in the last tools from outside. They have seen it countless times before. Still, some things remain beautiful no matter how often they return. Smoke rises steadily from the chimneys now, thicker and darker against the evening sky. The village smells of supper, wood smoke, warm bread, damp grass, and the coolness that comes when daylight begins slipping away from the earth. Somewhere a dog barks once. Then, apparently satisfied with his contribution to village security, settles down again. The swallows have vanished. The hens have found their roosts. The cat, after completing an evening patrol of great importance and uncertain purpose, slips through a half-open doorway before it can be closed. Inside the cottages, firelight replaces sunlight. It moves differently. Sunlight reveals everything. Firelight suggests things. It softens rough walls, brightens familiar faces, and turns the simplest wooden room into a place of warmth and shelter. Around one hearth, an elderly woman begins telling a story, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, in the quiet voice of someone who has told it many times before. The children listen. They know parts of it already. They may even know the ending. That hardly matters. The comfort is not only in the story, it is in hearing it told again. Outside, the last glow of sunset fades behind the western fields. The village, so busy only hours earlier, has folded itself into evening. The lanes are nearly empty. The well stands quiet. The church tower rises dark against the deepening sky. And beyond the cottages, the fields rest beneath a growing blanket of blue shadow. Tomorrow, the whole rhythm will begin again. The rooster will announce himself. The baker will wake before dawn. The shepherd will gather his flock. The blacksmith will light his forge. The children will discover new ways to turn ordinary paths into adventures. The village will open its doors to another day, but not yet. For now, medieval England is settling into night, and after a day of work, bread, bells, fields, smoke, laughter, patience, and quiet effort, the village is ready to rest. Darkness arrives gradually in medieval England. There is no sudden click of electric lights, no glowing street lamps outside the window, no distant city casting its orange light against the clouds. Instead, the daylight quietly retreats, surrendering one field, one hedgerow, and one rooftop at a time, until the village seems to fold gently into itself. From outside, the cottages appear almost sleepy. Small squares of warm amber light flicker through wooden shutters that have been left slightly open to welcome the evening breeze. Thin ribbons of smoke drift lazily upward from the thatched roofs before disappearing into the deepening blue sky. The day's work has ended. The village has become still once more. Inside one of these cottages, however, the evening is only just beginning. The doorway is low enough that nearly every adult bows instinctively before entering. Visitors unfamiliar with the cottage often discover this requirement by introducing their forehead to the sturdy oak lintel. The house usually wins. Once inside, your eyes need a moment to adjust. The room is smaller than many people today would expect. Not uncomfortable, simply compact. Everything has been arranged carefully because every foot of space matters. The centre of the cottage belongs to the hearth. It is more than a fireplace. It is the kitchen, the heater, the light, the gathering place, the heart of the home in every possible sense. A broad iron pot hangs above glowing embers, gently rocking from time to time whenever bubbles rise through the thick evening stew. The smell is wonderfully comforting. Barley, leeks, onions, a little cabbage, perhaps a handful of beans. If fortune has smiled upon the household recently, a few small pieces of bacon add a richer flavour to the broth. Nothing extravagant, everything welcome. The fire itself is alive. It crackles softly as oak logs slowly surrender themselves to glowing coals. Occasionally a pocket of sap hidden deep inside the timber gives a sharp pop, sending a tiny shower of sparks briefly into the smoky air before disappearing almost immediately. No one startles. The family has heard this sound every evening for as long as anyone can remember. Above the fire, bundles of herbs hang drying from thick oak beams, darkened by years of gentle smoke. Rosemary, sage, thyme, mint, lavender. As the warmth rises, each releases a faint fragrance into the room. The scents mingle with wood smoke and fresh bread until they become impossible to separate. If medieval England had a perfume, it would probably smell something like this. The walls are built from timber woven with wattle and coated in pale daub. They are not perfectly smooth. Tiny imperfections catch the dancing firelight, giving the entire room a warm, living quality. Nothing here feels manufactured. Every beam bears the marks of the axe that shaped it. Every peg was driven by hand. Every surface quietly reminds you that another pair of hands built this home long before tonight's fire was ever lit. The floor beneath your feet is firm, packed earth. Near the hearth lie several flat stones placed there to protect against wandering sparks. Elsewhere, fresh rushes cover much of the floor. They soften each step, help absorb moisture, and release a faint grassy scent that still lingers from the meadow where they were cut. Contrary to popular myth, villagers do not simply leave the same rushes on the floor year after year. They are replaced regularly. A clean cottage is not a luxury. It is simply part of caring for one's home. Against one wall rests a large oak chest bound with black iron straps. It is the family's wardrobe, cupboard, safe and treasure chest all in one. Inside are carefully folded linens, clothing, winter blankets, precious documents, and perhaps a few keepsakes handed down through generations. The chest itself serves another purpose during the day. It becomes a bench. Furniture in medieval England rarely enjoys the luxury of performing only one job. A sturdy oak table stands near the hearth. Its surface bears hundreds of tiny marks left by years of meals, mending, carving, baking, and conversation. Every scratch has been earned honestly. A modern dining table might spend most of its life waiting for guests. This table works every day. It has helped prepare countless loaves of bread, welcomed newborn children, supported tired elbows after long harvests, and listened quietly to conversations stretching back farther than anyone living can remember. A pair of wooden stools rests nearby. One rocks very slightly whenever someone sits upon it. The family knows exactly which direction to turn it. Visitors generally discover the secret through experience. Fortunately, pride recovers quickly. The family dog sleeps comfortably near the warmth of the hearth. His ears twitch occasionally as unfamiliar sounds drift through the open doorway. Although he appears deeply committed to resting, everyone knows that if a stranger approached the cottage, he would be awake before anyone else. Even asleep, he's quietly working. The cat has selected a rather higher position. She sits upon a broad shelf overlooking the room with calm authority. From here she watches everything: the cooking pot, the doorway, the family. Most importantly, any mouse foolish enough to believe darkness makes the grain stores easier to visit. She has no intention of allowing such misunderstandings to continue. Outside, the last glow of sunset slips beneath the distant hills. Inside, the cottage grows warmer with every passing minute. The world beyond its walls slowly disappears into darkness. For the family gathered around the fire, however, everything they need is already here. The fire settles into a steady rhythm. Earlier it crackled enthusiastically while fresh logs caught flame. Now it burns with quiet confidence, glowing deep orange beneath a blanket of pale ash. Every so often a piece of timber shifts with a soft pop, sending a handful of tiny sparks dancing upward before they disappear into the smoky darkness above. The family hardly notices. These sounds have accompanied nearly every evening of their lives. To them, silence would feel far stranger than the gentle conversation of a living fire. The room itself is smaller than many modern kitchens, yet somehow it never feels cramped. Perhaps it is because almost every object has earned its place. A wooden stool sits beside the hearth, worn smooth by years of faithful service. Its legs are slightly uneven, causing it to rock ever so gently unless one remembers which direction it prefers to face. Everyone in the household knows. Visitors usually discover the secret rather suddenly. Fortunately, medieval dignity appears remarkably resilient. The table occupies the centre of the room. It is sturdy rather than elegant, built from thick oak planks darkened by decades of meals, candlelight and hard-working hands. If one were to run a hand across its surface, every shallow groove would tell a story. Here a knife slipped while slicing yesterday's loaf. There a child proudly carved the first letter of his name before being gently reminded that tables are not intended to become manuscripts. The tiny mark remains. No one has bothered removing it. Families leave fingerprints in more ways than one. A single tallow candle flickers near the far end of the table. Its light is noticeably weaker than the glow of the fire. Tallow candles made from rendered animal fat are practical rather than luxurious. They burn steadily enough, although they possess a rather determined smell that politely reminds everyone exactly where they came from. Beeswax candles exist, of course. They burn more cleanly and smell faintly sweet. Unfortunately, they are considerably more expensive. Like many pleasant things in medieval life, they are enjoyed more often by monasteries and prosperous households than by ordinary villagers. The children gather near the hearth. One carefully turns a small hazelnut over in his fingers, while wondering whether it might roast nicely in the edge of the fire. His sister watches with cautious interest. Their mother notices both of them. Without lifting her eyes from the vegetable she's chopping, she quietly says, "Not too close." The children freeze. The hazelnut survives. So do their eyebrows. A successful evening all around. The vegetables are simple: leeks, turnips, cabbage, perhaps a handful of peas gathered earlier in the season. One by one they disappear into the simmering pot, where they join barley already softening in the broth. The meal requires very little attention now, only the occasional stir with a long wooden spoon. There is something deeply reassuring about a pot that asks only for patience. The father sits nearby repairing a leather strap used to harness one of the family's horses. The leather has begun cracking where it bends most often. Replacing it entirely would require valuable time and materials. Repairing it requires only care. He threads a bone needle through fresh leather cord with slow, practiced movements. His hands are rough. His stitches are surprisingly neat. The best repairs are rarely noticed. That is rather the point. Near the doorway, a pair of muddy boots waits patiently for tomorrow. They lean against the wall exactly where they were removed. Tiny flecks of dried earth still cling stubbornly to the soles. Some of that soil came from the wheat field, some from the stream crossing, some from the lane leading home. A day's journey remains quietly attached to them. Tomorrow those same boots will gather entirely new stories beneath their soles. Above the family, the heavy oak beams disappear into the dimness near the roof. Several bunches of onions hang drying beside the herbs. Strings of garlic sway ever so slightly whenever someone opens the door. A cured ham, carefully protected from wandering mice, rests high above the reach of curious hands. Food is never stored carelessly. Too much work has gone into earning it. A sudden breeze slips beneath the door. The fire flickers. The candle flame bows politely before standing upright once again. For just a moment everyone notices the cooler air. Then the warmth of the hearth quietly reclaims the room. Outside, darkness has settled fully across the village. Inside, the cottage has become its own little world. The walls shut out the night. The fire pushes back the cold. The smell of herbs, smoke, and supper fills every corner. There are no glowing screens, no distant engines, no electric lights humming softly in the background. Only the gentle sounds of a family ending an ordinary day together, and somehow that feels more than enough. The evening meal is finally ready. There is no great announcement, no dinner bell echoing across the house. The smell alone has been quietly informing everyone for several minutes. The woman tending the hearth lifts the heavy iron pot from above the glowing embers with a practiced movement that requires both strength and experience. Even after years of doing it, she's careful. A pot full of hot pottage has very little sympathy for carelessness. She settles it onto a thick wooden trivet in the centre of the table. Steam curls lazily upward, carrying with it the comforting fragrance of barley, onions, herbs, and slow-cooked vegetables. The family gathers almost without thinking. No one has assigned seats. No one remembers deciding who sits where. Everyone simply settles into the place they have occupied hundreds of evenings before. Some routines become so familiar they stop feeling like routines at all. The father reaches for the loaf baked earlier that morning. The crust crackles softly beneath the knife. Fresh bread has a remarkable way of improving even the simplest meal. A thick slice is passed to each member of the family. The youngest child receives a slightly larger piece than expected. Growing, everyone agrees, is hungry work. The children wait, only for a moment, long enough for the first bowls to be filled. Then wooden spoons begin their gentle journey through the steaming pottage. The sound is wonderfully quiet. The soft scrape of spoon against bowl, the occasional crackle from the fire, the whisper of someone blowing gently across a spoonful that is still far too hot. No one rushes. Meals are not merely opportunities to eat. They are opportunities to stop. Outside, the village has almost disappeared into darkness. Inside, time seems to slow. The father tears another piece of bread before dipping it into the thick broth. He smiles almost imperceptibly, not because tonight's meal is extraordinary, because it is dependable. There is comfort in knowing exactly what supper will taste like after a long day. The youngest child, meanwhile, has become deeply fascinated by a pea floating around the edge of the bowl. Repeated attempts to catch it with a spoon prove surprisingly unsuccessful. The pea appears determined to continue its voyage. Eventually, after what could reasonably be described as an extended naval campaign, victory is achieved. The child beams with satisfaction. No one mentions that the pea probably would have stayed in the bowl eventually. Some victories are best enjoyed without unnecessary analysis. Near the hearth, the family dog lifts his head hopefully. He's been observing supper with quiet professionalism. His expression suggests that if anyone were to accidentally drop a crust of bread, he would be willing to assist, entirely as a public service. His patience is eventually rewarded. A tiny piece of crust falls, not entirely by accident, from the youngest child's hand. The dog catches it before it reaches the floor. His efficiency is remarkable. His dignity remains intact. Everyone benefits. The cat watches from her shelf with considerably less enthusiasm. Bread has never interested her. She's waiting for something with rather more ambition than barley. For now, she simply blinks slowly before curling her tail around her paws once again. Patience, she knows, is often rewarded after everyone else has gone to sleep. Conversation drifts gently around the table. No one dominates it. The father mentions a section of fence that will need repairing tomorrow. The mother wonders whether enough onions remain hanging from the beams to last another fortnight. The older children describe seeing a fox disappearing into the woods earlier that afternoon. The youngest attempts to explain the heroic battle with the wandering pea. This story receives every bit as much attention as the fox. Quite rightly. Every family decides for itself which events deserve becoming legends. The candle burns steadily beside the table now. Its flame dances gently whenever someone reaches across the room. The tallow gives off its familiar scent, although no one seems to notice any more. People rarely smell the familiar. Visitors might remember the candle. The family remembers the evening. Outside, a breeze brushes softly against the thatched roof. The sound is almost like distant waves upon a quiet shore. The thick thatch insulates the cottage beautifully. In winter it helps keep warmth inside. In summer it keeps the fiercest heat outside. Like many things in medieval life, it requires regular maintenance. But when cared for properly, it serves a family faithfully for many years. The meal slowly comes to an end. Bowls grow empty. The final pieces of bread disappear. Someone leans back with a quiet sigh of satisfaction. Not because the feast was extravagant, because it was enough. There is particular contentment that follows honest work, simple food, and the company of people you know well. It asks for nothing more. The bowls are gradually emptied. Not all at once. One family member reaches the bottom long before another. The youngest child proudly scrapes every last spoonful from the wooden bowl with complete determination, convinced that leaving even a single barley grain behind would be a terrible waste. His father watches with quiet amusement. "There," he says with a smile, "I believe you've defeated the stew." The child nods solemnly. It has been a hard-fought victory. The bowl fortunately accepts defeat with remarkable dignity. Around the table, conversation slows as comfortably as the fire. No one feels obliged to speak simply because silence has arrived. The quiet itself is welcome. There is something deeply restful about sharing a room with people who require no performance from one another. The cottage settles into one of those peaceful moments that every family recognizes but few ever describe. The work is finished. The meal is over. Tomorrow has not yet begun asking for attention. For a little while, There is simply this. The mother gathers the empty bowls one by one. She carries them to a wooden bucket filled with cool water drawn earlier from the village well. There is no washing up liquid tucked beneath the sink, no gleaming porcelain basin. Instead, each bowl is rinsed carefully before being scrubbed with a cloth and a little coarse sand to lift away stubborn traces of food. The process is surprisingly effective. It has been for centuries. The children help without being asked. The oldest dries the bowls using a clean linen cloth. The younger one carefully stacks wooden spoons upon the table. One spoon rolls away unexpectedly. The dog, convinced this may somehow involve food, rises immediately to investigate. After a brief inspection, he concludes that wooden spoons remain disappointingly inedible. He returns to his place beside the hearth with the patient resignation of someone accustomed to life's occasional disappointments. The fire has burned lower now. Bright flames have given way to glowing coals that radiate a deep, steady warmth. They require remarkably little attention. Every now and then the father reaches for the iron poker, gently shifting a log so fresh surfaces catch the heat. The movement is slow, unhurried. A small adjustment now means another comfortable hour later. Planning ahead often begins with something as simple as a piece of firewood. Outside, darkness has settled completely over the village. The windows no longer reveal gardens or lanes. Instead, they have become dark mirrors reflecting the warm little room within. The dancing firelight glows softly upon every familiar face. It catches polished patches on the wooden table. It glitters briefly on the iron cooking hook above the hearth. It turns the smoke-darkened beams overhead into deep ribbons of amber and shadow. The cottage feels smaller now, not because its walls have moved, because the world outside has quietly disappeared. Everything important exists inside this single room. The old wooden chest, the drying herbs, the kettle gently warming near the fire, the family, the warmth, the light. There is a curious comfort in living within such clearly defined boundaries. The day's worries remain outside. Tomorrow's work has not yet arrived. Only the evening asks for attention. The youngest child has gradually edged closer to the fire, not intentionally, simply one comfortable shuffle at a time. His eyelids grow heavier with each passing minute. He leans gently against his mother's shoulder. She continues mending a linen sleeve without missing a stitch. After all, this has happened many evenings before. Children possess an astonishing ability to fall asleep almost anywhere when they have spent an entire day exploring the world. One of the older children quietly carves a tiny whistle from a fallen elder branch gathered earlier that afternoon. Small curls of pale wood gather at his feet. Every so often he lifts the unfinished whistle to inspect it with serious concentration before shaving away another impossibly thin sliver. His grandfather watches from across the room. He offers no instructions, only the occasional nod. Some lessons are taught without words. Nearby, the grandmother opens a small woven basket resting beside her chair. Inside are several balls of wool waiting to become tomorrow's work. She begins spinning with calm, practiced movements that appear almost effortless. The spindle turns, the wool twists. Thread slowly appears where only loose fibres existed moments before. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Spin, draw, twist, wind, repeat. There is no machine humming, no rushing gears, only skilled hands quietly transforming one simple thing into another. The room grows quieter still, not empty, peaceful, the kind of quiet filled with tiny sounds that daytime never allows you to notice. The soft scrape of wool against careful fingers, the gentle crack of settling firewood, the slow breathing of the dog asleep once more beside the hearth, the occasional rustle of the herbs hanging overhead as a cool breeze slips beneath the door. It is in moments like these that the cottage feels less like a building and more like a heartbeat. The evening grows quieter with every passing minute, not because anyone has asked for silence. The day has simply reached that peaceful hour when conversation naturally becomes softer, voices lower without anyone noticing, movements become gentler. Even laughter, when it comes, seems content to remain close to the fire instead of filling the entire room. The meal has ended. The bowls have been washed and carefully stacked upon a narrow wooden shelf. The heavy cooking pot now hangs slightly away from the hottest part of the fire, allowing what remains inside to cool slowly for tomorrow's breakfast. Very little food is ever wasted. A pot of pottage often lives several lives. Tonight's supper quietly becomes tomorrow's first meal before anyone has even gone to bed. The father walks once around the cottage with the unhurried confidence of someone performing a task completed thousands of times before. He checks the wooden latch upon the door, not because he expects trouble, because habits, once learned, require very little thought. He pauses beside one of the small shuttered windows. Outside, only darkness greets him now. The lane has disappeared entirely. Where only an hour ago neighbours exchanged greetings on their way home, there is now only the faint outline of hedgerows beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. He smiles to himself before fastening the shutter completely. The night can remain outside. Tonight belongs to the family. The youngest child stirs slightly in his sleep near the warmth of the hearth. His small wooden whistle still rests loosely in one hand. Whatever adventure occupied his dreams has apparently become quite exciting. One foot gives an enthusiastic little kick beneath the wool blanket. The family notices. No one says anything. Some moments are too gentle to interrupt. Near the table the grandmother folds away her spinning. The spindle has grown noticeably heavier with fresh thread since supper began. She examines it for a moment with quiet satisfaction, before placing it carefully inside a woven basket. Tomorrow the work will continue. Very little in medieval life is ever truly finished. It simply pauses until morning. The mother reaches upward toward the herbs hanging from the darkened beams. She pinches a few dried lavender blossoms between her fingers before placing them inside a small linen pouch. Their fragrance is subtle, clean, comforting. She tucks the little bundle beneath folded blankets, waiting to be spread later across the sleeping pallets. Fresh herbs cannot replace a feather mattress. They can, however, make an ordinary bed feel just a little more welcoming. Sometimes comfort arrives in surprisingly small forms. The candle upon the table is burned low. Its flame grows shorter. The pool of melted tallow beneath the wick reflects tiny flashes of orange from the fire. The father reaches forward, moistens 2 fingers, and gently pinches out the flame. A thin ribbon of smoke curls upward for several moments before quietly disappearing into the shadows above. Instantly the cottage changes. The fire now becomes the only light. It throws long, dancing shadows across the timber walls. The herbs hanging overhead sway almost imperceptibly whenever the warm air rises from the glowing embers. Every familiar object seems softer now, less defined. The great oak chest becomes little more than a dark shape resting against the wall. The stools stretch into long silhouettes across the packed earth floor. The polished cooking pot catches a single ribbon of firelight before fading back into darkness. Outside, the wind has strengthened just a little, not enough to cause concern, only enough to remind everyone that beyond these sturdy walls lies a very different world. The thatched roof answers with a gentle rustle. Somewhere farther away, a loose wooden shutter taps softly against another cottage before falling quiet again. The sounds are familiar, reassuring even. Homes have voices of their own. You simply learn them after enough evenings spent beneath the same roof. The family dog raises his head briefly. One ear turns toward the door. He listens for a moment. Apparently satisfied that the mysterious sound belongs to nothing more dangerous than the evening breeze, he lowers his head once again with an impressively dramatic sigh. It has been an exhausting day of faithfully protecting the household from entirely imaginary dangers. The cat, however, has become noticeably more alert. Her golden eyes remain fixed upon one shadowy corner near the grain chest. She waits without moving, patient, silent. Somewhere, perhaps behind the wall or beneath the floor, a tiny mouse has made the unfortunate mistake of believing the family has gone to sleep. The cat politely intends to correct that misunderstanding. The fire burns lower. The room grows warmer. The voices grow fewer. No one feels hurried. Tomorrow will arrive soon enough. For now there is only the comforting glow of the hearth, the familiar company of family, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from an ordinary day honestly lived. Outside, medieval England settles into darkness. Inside, peace arrives one gentle ember at a time. By now the cottage has become wonderfully quiet, not silent. A medieval home is almost never completely silent. The fire continues its gentle conversation with the logs resting upon it. Now and then a glowing ember slips deeper into the ashes with a soft sigh. Outside, a breeze brushes lightly across the thatched roof before wandering away toward the sleeping fields. Someone shifts comfortably on a wooden stool. The family dog dreams quietly beside the hearth, his paws twitching ever so slightly as though chasing something far more exciting than anything he encountered during the day. Perhaps a rabbit, perhaps a squirrel, perhaps an unusually disrespectful goose. Dreams, thankfully, rarely require historical accuracy. The work of the day is over. For the first time since before sunrise, there is nowhere anyone absolutely needs to be. That simple thought feels strangely luxurious. The grandmother reaches toward the fire, turning one of the glowing logs gently with the iron poker. Tiny sparks rise into the smoky air before disappearing among the heavy oak beams overhead. She settles back into her chair. The room grows still. Without anyone asking, everyone knows what comes next. A story. People have always loved stories. Long before printed books became common, long before newspapers, long before radio or television, stories travelled from one generation to the next by memory alone. Some changed a little every time they were told. Others remained almost exactly the same for decades. No one worried very much about perfect accuracy. A good story was measured by something rather different. Did people lean in to listen? The grandmother smiles softly before beginning. There was once. That's all she says. Immediately every child in the room is paying attention. It is remarkable how little humanity has changed. Those 3 words still possess extraordinary power. Tonight's tale concerns a clever fox who repeatedly outwits a greedy wolf living beyond the old forest. The wolf is larger, stronger, entirely convinced of his own brilliance. Unfortunately, the fox has noticed something important. Confidence and wisdom are not always close friends. The children laugh quietly as the wolf once again finds himself tricked into an entirely avoidable embarrassment. The grandfather chuckles. He has heard this story countless times. He laughs at exactly the same places every single time. Some stories become comfortable precisely because nothing changes. Outside, the first owl calls from somewhere beyond the village. Its deep, haunting note drifts softly across the fields before fading into the darkness. One child pauses for a moment. The grandmother notices immediately. "Only an owl," she says warmly. The story continues. Owls have probably interrupted storytellers for hundreds of years. The arrangement seems perfectly agreeable to everyone involved. The father listens while quietly sharpening a small kitchen knife upon a smooth whetstone. The movement is slow, gentle, almost rhythmic. Stroke, turn, stroke, turn. There is no urgency. A sharp knife tomorrow means easier work tomorrow. Many evening tasks exist solely to make the following day a little kinder. Near the doorway, the eldest daughter continues spinning wool. The spindle turns almost lazily now. The thread grows longer with every patient movement of her fingers. She scarcely looks down anymore. Years of practice have taught her hands what to do without constant supervision. There is something deeply satisfying about watching. Skill becomes second nature. The room glows warmly beneath the firelight. Faces brighten as someone leans closer to the hearth, then soften again as they settle back into shadow. The herbs hanging above seem almost golden for a moment, before disappearing into darkness once more. Even the polished surface of the oak table catches the dancing light, reflecting tiny flickers that move like slow ripples upon still water. The youngest child fights bravely against sleep. His eyelids disagree. Each blink lasts slightly longer than the one before. He straightens himself, listens carefully, nods very seriously at an important moment in the fox's adventure. Then, almost without warning, his head gently settles against his father's arm. Within moments, he's asleep. The story continues anyway. Stories are not only for those who hear every word. Sometimes they become part of the warmth of a room itself, a comfort wrapping gently around everyone present. Outside, the stars continue quietly multiplying above medieval England. Inside, time seems to have forgotten the cottage entirely. The evening has become unmistakably late. The fire still glows warmly in the hearth, but it no longer reaches eagerly toward the chimney with bright yellow flames. Instead, it settles quietly into itself. The largest logs have collapsed into a deep bed of glowing embers, their gentle orange light breathing softly beneath a blanket of pale grey ash. The warmth they give is different now, gentler, steadier, the sort of warmth that asks for nothing except that you sit beside it a little longer. Around the cottage, the final tasks of the day begin almost without anyone speaking. The father rises first. He stretches slowly, the familiar stiffness in his back reminding him that today involved more lifting, bending and walking than he had noticed while the work itself occupied his attention. There is no complaint, only the quiet acceptance earned by years of living close to the rhythm of the land. Tomorrow his muscles will loosen again after the first hour in the fields. They always do. He lifts one of the heavy wooden benches away from the table and slides it gently against the wall. The movement creates surprisingly more space inside the cottage. Furniture here is wonderfully adaptable. The same bench that supported supper only an hour ago will soon support blankets, clothing, or sleeping children. Every object quietly changes its purpose as the day unfolds. The mother unties the linen apron she's worn since before sunrise. There are tiny traces of flour near one pocket, a faint green stain from crushed herbs near the hem, a little soot from tending the fire. She smiles softly as she folds it, not because it is clean, because it has done exactly what it was meant to do. There is quiet satisfaction in tools that show honest use. Above the hearth, the hanging herbs sway almost imperceptibly as warm air continues rising toward the roof. The rosemary releases one final hint of fragrance. The lavender seems sweeter now than it did earlier. Perhaps it is simply because the room has grown so wonderfully still. Or perhaps evening has its own way of sharpening the senses. Near the great oak chest, the eldest daughter unfolds several thick wool blankets. The wool feels slightly coarse beneath her fingertips, not unpleasantly so, simply honest. The blankets have warmed countless sleepers through countless winters. Each spring they were aired beneath bright sunshine. Each autumn they returned once more to the cottage before the colder nights arrived. Some comforts become trusted companions rather than possessions. One by one, simple sleeping pallets are arranged upon the packed earth floor. They are not permanent beds. During daylight the room belongs to work, cooking, and family life. Only now does it quietly become a bedroom. There is something strangely beautiful about a home that transforms itself with the passing hours. A modern visitor might initially be surprised. Where are the bedrooms? Where are the hallways? Where are the wardrobes? Then, slowly, another thought appears. Perhaps one room used thoughtfully can sometimes feel more welcoming than many rooms used carelessly. The youngest child wakes just enough to rub sleepy eyes while watching the preparations. He is not fully awake, not fully asleep. The wonderful little world that exists between the two. His grandmother smiles. "You've managed to sleep through the washing up again." The child considers this accusation with great seriousness. "I was helping." His answer arrives without the slightest hesitation. Helping apparently had simply required closing both eyes. No one argues. The explanation is accepted with remarkable generosity. The family dog stands, stretches each leg with theatrical determination, circles twice near the hearth, and finally settles upon his favourite patch of floor. No one assigned him that place. He claimed it years ago. Everyone else has quietly respected the decision ever since. The cat performs an entirely different evening ritual. She disappears. No one knows exactly where. No one asks. Every experienced household understands that cats maintain responsibilities best left unexplained. Should a mouse make an unfortunate decision during the night, everyone trusts she will handle the matter with professional efficiency. Outside, the breeze has become noticeably cooler. It slips beneath the door for only a moment before the warmth of the cottage gently pushes it back again. The fire answers with a quiet crackle. The room feels wonderfully safe. The walls may be simple, the roof may be made of thatch, the furniture may be plain. Yet within these modest surroundings exists something every family hopes to find before the end of a long day: shelter, warmth, and peace. Soon the last glowing embers will become the only light remaining in the cottage. Soon even conversation will surrender to silence. Soon the village itself will be asleep. The cottage has finally grown still. Not perfectly still. Homes are never perfectly silent. They simply exchange the sounds of daytime for the quieter conversations of the night. You pull the thick wool blanket a little closer around your shoulders. It feels heavier than a modern blanket. Not unpleasantly so. There is a comforting weight to it. as though it has every intention of remaining exactly where it belongs until morning. The last warmth from the fire continues drifting gently across the room. It no longer reaches every corner quite as confidently as it did earlier. Instead, it gathers near the hearth, wrapping itself around the old timbers and the packed earth floor before slowly fading into the cooler air beyond. The embers breathe softly. Every few moments one glows brighter beneath its blanket of ash, only to settle back again into a deep, peaceful orange. Watching them is strangely hypnotic. You begin to understand why people could spend long evenings simply sitting beside a fire without ever feeling bored. Flames demand attention. Embers invite reflection. The cottage smells different now than it did during supper. The rich aroma of the stew has almost disappeared. In its place remain gentler scents: warm oak, dry lavender, a faint trace of rosemary still hanging from the beams overhead, the familiar sweetness of clean wool blankets, and always the quiet smell of wood smoke that has become part of every wall, every beam and every piece of furniture inside the little house. After only a short while, you scarcely notice it anymore. Outside, the breeze has become cooler. It slips across the thatched roof with a soft rustling sound that reminds you of distant waves rolling gently upon a quiet shore. The roof answers with tiny whispers as the reeds shift against one another. Nothing alarming, only the ordinary language of a house settling comfortably beneath the night sky. Somewhere beyond the cottage an owl calls. The note is deep, calm, unhurried. For several moments there is only silence. Then another owl answers from much farther away across the dark fields. The exchange lasts only a few seconds, yet it somehow makes the countryside feel much larger than it did during daylight. The family dog raises his head briefly. One ear turns toward the sound. Apparently deciding that the owl has every right to conduct its evening business without interference, he lowers his head once again with an impressive sigh before returning to sleep. His duties, for the moment, have been postponed until something considerably more exciting presents itself. The cat disagrees. She has disappeared entirely. Somewhere within the quiet darkness of the cottage, she continues her patient inspection of every shadow near the grain chest and the walls. Her work begins precisely when everyone else's ends. If a mouse has become adventurous this evening, it may soon discover that the household employs a remarkably efficient night watchman, or perhaps night watch cat. The distinction seems important. You shift slightly beneath the blankets. The straw mattress rustles softly beneath you. It is firmer than the beds many people know today. Yet after walking behind a plough, carrying water from the well, tending gardens, mending tools, or gathering firewood since before sunrise, comfort is measured rather differently. A tired body rarely argues with an honest bed. Above you, the dark oak beams disappear into shadow. Earlier they held bunches of herbs glowing warmly in the firelight. Now they are little more than silhouettes against the darkness. Only occasionally does a glowing ember brighten the room just enough to reveal them once again before allowing them to disappear. Your breathing begins matching the quiet rhythm of the fire. Slowly, naturally. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing left to repair, no fields waiting to be ploughed, no bread waiting to be baked. Tomorrow will ask many things of you. Tonight asks only one: rest. Your eyes gradually become accustomed to the darkness. At first the cottage had seemed to disappear the moment the candle was extinguished. Now, little by little, familiar shapes begin quietly returning. The outline of the great oak chest beside the wall, the wooden table standing patiently in the centre of the room, the herbs suspended from the ceiling beams, the gentle curve of the iron cooking pot hanging above the hearth. Firelight has a curious way of revealing only what it wishes to reveal. Everything else waits peacefully in shadow. The glowing embers continue their slow conversation. Now and then one shifts ever so slightly beneath the ash, sending a tiny shower of orange sparks upward before they fade into darkness. The room breathes with them. Warm, cool, warm again. You find yourself listening to sounds that daylight never allowed you to notice. The faint settling of heavy timbers as they cool after holding the warmth of the day's fire. The whisper of wool brushing softly against linen whenever someone turns beneath a blanket. The quiet sigh of sleeping family members whose breathing has gradually settled into slow, steady rhythms. There is something deeply reassuring about hearing other people sleep. Their breathing reminds you that everyone has safely reached the end of another ordinary day. Outside, the village has almost disappeared. No wagons creak along the lane. No blacksmith's hammer rings across the green. No children laugh beside the well. Darkness has gently gathered every familiar sound and tucked it away until morning. Only nature remains awake. A breeze moves through the hedgerows. Somewhere beyond the fields, reeds beside a stream brush softly against one another. Farther still, a fox calls into the darkness. It is an unusual sound, sharp, almost questioning. If you had never heard one before, you might briefly wonder what mysterious creature wandered beyond the edge of the village. The family dog lifts his head for only a moment, apparently deciding that the fox is conducting perfectly ordinary fox business. He lowers his nose once again onto his paws. His professional opinion seems reassuring enough. The cat, however, the cat has returned, silently, without anyone noticing exactly when. She appears beside the hearth with the calm confidence of someone who has spent the last hour attending to matters too important to explain. Whether those matters involved mice or merely inspecting every corner of the cottage remains known only to her. She leaps effortlessly onto the oak chest before curling herself into a perfect circle. Within moments she is asleep, or at least pretending to be. Cats have always understood the importance of keeping certain mysteries entirely to themselves. Your blanket has become pleasantly warm now. The coolness you noticed earlier has disappeared completely. You shift slightly, finding that one comfortable position every sleeper eventually discovers after a little patient negotiation with mattress, blanket, and pillow. The pillow itself is simple, filled with straw, feathers, wool, or dried grasses, depending upon what the household could spare. It does not sink softly beneath your head. Instead, it supports it with quiet firmness. Comfort in medieval England often came from familiarity rather than luxury. Outside, clouds drift slowly across the stars. Every now and then, pale moonlight slips through the tiny gap between the shutters, laying a narrow silver line across the packed earth floor, before quietly disappearing once more behind another passing cloud. The room changes with every movement of the sky. One moment, everything belongs to the warm orange glow of the embers. The next, cool silver moonlight briefly shares the room before surrendering once again to darkness. Neither light disturbs the peace. Together they seem almost to take turns watching over the sleeping cottage. You remember the day's journey, the first church bell before sunrise, mist hanging over the fields, fresh bread cooling outside the baker's door, the blacksmith's hammer, children laughing beside the stream, the scent of herbs drying above the hearth, the quiet story told before the fire. Each memory drifts gently through your thoughts before floating away again, like leaves carried slowly downstream. There is no need to hold on to them. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day, and ordinary days, you're beginning to discover, possess a quiet beauty entirely of their own. Beyond the thick cottage walls, medieval England sleeps beneath a sky crowded with stars. No distant towns brighten the horizon. No electric glow softens the darkness. The night is complete, deep, ancient, wonderfully still. By now the cottage has become almost completely dark. Only the embers remain awake. Their warm glow no longer reaches the far corners of the room. Instead, it settles quietly around the hearth, painting the nearby floor with soft shades of orange and deep crimson before fading gently into shadow. Your eyes are closed, or perhaps only half closed. It hardly matters. The warmth beneath the blankets has become wonderfully familiar. The cool air brushing against your face feels pleasant rather than uncomfortable. Somewhere nearby, someone turns over in their sleep. The straw beneath their mattress whispers softly before becoming still once again. You are beginning to understand something about medieval nights. They are not empty. They are simply quieter, without engines, without electricity, without the endless background hum of modern life. Even the smallest sounds become companions. The gentle breathing of your family, the settling of ancient timber, the occasional crack from the last glowing log in the hearth, the breeze brushing patiently across the thatched roof. Each sound arrives alone. Each is given room to exist. Outside, the village has almost disappeared into the darkness. Only the faint outline of the church tower rises against a sky overflowing with stars. There are so many that it becomes impossible to count them. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a pale river of light. For most villagers, it is simply another familiar part of the heavens. Beautiful, constant, comforting. Few people living in medieval England ever experience the kind of night sky that has become rare in many parts of the modern world. There are no streetlights, no glowing signs, no cities beyond the horizon washing the sky in pale orange light. When darkness arrives, it truly arrives. The stars answer by revealing themselves in astonishing numbers. A cool wind wanders quietly across the fields beyond the village. It carries the scent of damp grass, distant woodland, and the slow-moving stream that winds between the meadows. The air itself seems cleaner somehow. Not because medieval life was easier, certainly not, but because the countryside still belongs almost entirely to nature once the day's work is finished. Somewhere in the distance a horse shifts inside its stable. You hear the gentle scrape of a hoof against packed earth, then the quiet rustle of hay as the old animal settles once again. Even the livestock seem to understand that the world has become a place for resting rather than working. The fire continues shrinking. Its glow becomes smaller with every passing minute. Yet somehow the room does not feel colder. The thick timber walls still hold much of the day's warmth. The wool blanket has become wonderfully comfortable. You pull it a little higher without fully waking. It is a movement performed almost automatically. People have been making that same sleepy adjustment for thousands of years. Some habits belong to all generations. For many people living during the Middle Ages, the night itself unfolded differently than it often does today. Historians believe it was common in many parts of Europe for people to experience what has become known as a first sleep. After several peaceful hours of rest, they might wake naturally for a short while before returning to what was simply called the second sleep. No alarm clock interrupted them, no glowing phone tempted them to check the time. They simply woke, sat quietly, perhaps whispered a few words with a spouse, offered a prayer, added another small log to the fire if the night had grown especially cold. Then, when sleep returned, they welcomed it without hurry. Lying here now, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of the sleeping cottage, that ancient custom suddenly feels perfectly understandable. The night is not something to conquer, it is something to move through slowly. There is no urgency. Morning will come when it is ready. Until then. The village rests, the fields rest, even the wind seems content to soften its voice. And somewhere beyond the little cottage, beneath a sky filled with countless silent stars, medieval England sleeps. Time behaves differently in the middle of the night. Without clocks to consult or glowing numbers beside the bed, the passing hours become wonderfully unimportant. There's no reason to wonder whether it is 1 o'clock or 3. The night asks for no such precision. It simply unfolds at its own gentle pace. You lie quietly beneath the heavy wool blanket, listening as the cottage settles around you. The warmth from the hearth has softened considerably now. The bright orange embers have become fewer, though each still glows with quiet determination beneath a blanket of fine white ash. Every now and then one collapses inward with the faintest whisper, sending a tiny pulse of warmth into the room before becoming still once more. It is difficult to imagine a calmer sound. The air has cooled just enough to make the blanket feel especially comforting. You tuck one corner a little closer beneath your shoulder without fully waking. It is the sort of small movement that seems almost instinctive. No conscious thought accompanies it. Only the quiet conversation between a sleeping body and the coolness of the night. Somewhere nearby the family dog lets out a long, contented sigh. He is not moved from his place beside the hearth. His dreams appear peaceful. One ear twitches now and then, perhaps responding to some imaginary adventure taking place far beyond the cottage walls. If dogs dream of ordinary village life, one hopes tonight's dream contains generous portions of bread, open fields, and absolutely no geese with difficult personalities. Outside the wind has grown softer again. The thatched roof no longer rustles continuously. Instead, occasional breaths of cool air move gently across it before fading into silence. Between those moments, nothing, not empty silence, living silence, the kind filled with tiny sounds that only reveal themselves when the world has finally become still enough to hear them. The slow creak of an old timber, the gentle settling of the packed earth beneath the cottage, the distant murmur of water moving patiently through the nearby stream. Somewhere beyond the village, leaves stir quietly in the branches of ancient oaks that have watched over these fields for centuries. They have witnessed harvest after harvest, winter after winter, generation after generation. Tonight is simply another peaceful night among thousands. For a few moments you find yourself awake, not fully, only enough to become aware of the remarkable darkness surrounding the cottage. Modern nights are rarely this dark. Even far from cities there is often some distant glow upon the horizon. Here, there is almost none. These stars provide their quiet company overhead. The moon, when clouds permit, offers a gentle silver light across the fields. Otherwise, darkness belongs completely to the countryside. It is not frightening, only honest. A reminder that night was once something people accepted rather than resisted. Your thoughts drift lazily through memories of the day. The baker lifting warm loaves from the oven, children racing beside the stream, the steady ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, smoke rising peacefully above the cottages, the grandmother smiling as she began her story beside the fire. The memories arrive gently. None demand attention. They simply pass through your mind like reflections floating across calm water. It occurs to you that almost every person sleeping in the village has lived a day much like yours. The shepherd, the miller, the cooper, the widow tending her small garden, the young apprentice whose hands still smell faintly of fresh-cut timber, the baker who will be awake long before anyone else. Each has carried today's small victories and quiet disappointments into sleep. Each rests beneath the same wide sky. Each will wake tomorrow to another ordinary day. There is something strangely comforting about belonging to that shared rhythm. The embers grow smaller, the cottage grows cooler, yet somehow it feels even more peaceful than before. The world beyond the thick walls has become wonderfully distant. No errands remain. No decisions wait to be made. Morning has not yet begun asking anything of you. For this brief and gentle part of the night, you are exactly where you're meant to be. At some point during the night, you become aware that you are awake, not suddenly. There is no sharp return to consciousness. Sleep simply loosens its gentle hold for a little while, allowing the quiet world around you to drift slowly back into focus. The cottage remains almost completely dark. Only a few faithful embers continue glowing beneath the ash, casting a faint orange light that barely reaches beyond the hearth. The room feels different now. Earlier, it had been settling into sleep. Now it rests deeply within it. The breathing of the family has become wonderfully steady. Someone turns quietly beneath a blanket before becoming still again. The dog has not moved. Even the cat, whose nightly adventures remain entirely her own business, appears to have chosen a warm place somewhere out of sight. For many people living in medieval England, waking briefly during the night would not have seemed unusual at all. Before clocks ruled daily life, and long before electricity encouraged people to remain awake late into the evening, sleep often followed a gentler rhythm. Several hours of deep rest, a quiet period of wakefulness, then another peaceful sleep until dawn. To those living it, there was nothing remarkable about this pattern. It was simply part of the night. Lying quietly beneath your blanket, it becomes easy to understand why. There is no pressure to fall asleep immediately. No concern that something has gone wrong. The night itself feels generous, unhurried. You simply listen. Outside, the village is wrapped in a silence so complete that even the smallest sounds seem important. A horse shifts its weight inside a nearby stable. Leather tack gives the faintest creak against a wooden post. Then all is still once more. Far across the fields, another owl calls into the darkness. Its voice is answered only by the wind moving gently through distant trees. The stars remain brilliant. Although hidden from your view inside the cottage, you know they are still there. Thousands upon thousands of quiet lights suspended above England, just as they were before tonight, and just as they will be long after every person sleeping in this little village has become part of history. That thought is strangely comforting. Some things belong to every generation. The stars, the changing seasons, the warmth of a fire on a cool evening, the relief of finally resting after an honest day's work. Those things require no translation across centuries. They are understood instinctively. You become aware of the scent of the cottage once again, the herbs hanging from the beams, the oak timbers warmed gently by yesterday's fire, the clean smell of dried straw beneath the mattress, the faint trace of smoke lingering quietly in the air. Visitors might notice these scents immediately. For the family living here, they have long since become the smell of home. A tiny sound catches your attention. Scratch, 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 very faint, somewhere inside the wall. Perhaps a mouse investigating the darkness with considerably more confidence than wisdom. One imagines the household cat has already heard it as well. Whether she chooses to intervene this evening is entirely at her discretion. Cats, after all, have never considered themselves ordinary employees. They operate more as highly skilled consultants, available when necessary, entirely independent the rest of the time. The thought drifts gently through your mind before floating away again. No urgency follows it. The little mouse has survived every night until now. Perhaps tonight will be another fortunate one. Perhaps not. That decision belongs to the cat. The breeze freshens for only a moment. You hear it slipping softly across the roof before disappearing once more into the darkness beyond the fields. The cottage remains wonderfully warm despite the cooler air outside. The thick thatch overhead, the sturdy timber walls, and the lingering warmth of the embers continue protecting everyone inside. Shelter. It is such a simple word. Yet lying here in the quiet hours before dawn, you understand why it has always been among humanity's greatest comforts. Gradually, almost without noticing, your thoughts become slower. The sounds around you drift farther away. The blanket grows a little warmer. Your breathing settles once more into the same peaceful rhythm as the sleeping cottage, without effort, without hurry. The second sleep begins. The second sleep is a gentler one. Deeper, somehow, the way sleep tends to be once the household has stopped asking anything of you, and the day has officially given up trying. Time passes the way it always does at this hour, which is to say nobody is keeping track and nobody particularly minds. The embers in the hearth have shrunk to a handful of survivors, glowing faintly beneath their blanket of ash. They are still working, quietly, stubbornly, asking for no thanks, in the manner of most things that keep a household running. Outside, the sky is still thick with stars, and nothing has visibly changed. And yet something has. Not in any way your eyes would catch. The air has simply decided to be honest about the hour. Cooler, fresher. There is a particular stillness that only turns up in the last hours before dawn, as though even the wind has agreed to wait quietly rather than make a scene. The old oak trees stand motionless. The stream beyond the meadow sounds louder than it did earlier, not because it has changed, but because everything else has finally stopped competing with it for attention. You sleep on, undisturbed. In the corner, the youngest child turns over and pulls the blanket more firmly under one chin, an entirely automatic gesture performed with the confidence of someone who's had considerable practice. Nearby, the dog lifts his head for exactly as long as duty requires, listens toward the door, hears nothing alarming, and settles back down with the satisfaction of a guardian whose services remain, fortunately, unnecessary. This is, by his own estimation, an excellent shift. The cat has not gone to bed. She rarely does, on principle. She sits on the windowsill watching the darkness with the total concentration of someone who takes her job, whatever it technically is, very seriously. A moth drifts past. A hedge rustles. Some small creature makes a poor decision somewhere in the long grass. She notes all of it and acts on none of it, because patience, as far as she's concerned, is simply hunting with better posture. Across the sleeping village, one household has already decided that the night is over, regardless of what the sky has to say about it. The baker wakes without an alarm, without a bell, purely on the strength of habit so old it has stopped feeling like effort. He lies still a moment, listening to his wife breathe evenly beside him, then accepts the obvious truth that has greeted him at this hour for as long as he can remember. Bread does not care what time you'd prefer to start. He reaches for yesterday's boots, still faintly outlined in flour, and begins again. Somewhere on his perch the rooster shifts, ruffles himself, and very deliberately does not crow. Even he has standards. Morning, in his professional opinion, has not yet earned the introduction, and he intends to make it wait exactly as long as tradition demands. There is something peculiar about this stretch of night. Not quite yesterday, not yet today. The world simply park between the two with the engine off. The fields wait. The church bell waits. Even the sun, still well below the horizon, has not bothered showing up yet, which feels, at this hour, entirely reasonable. For one brief, uncontested stretch, medieval England belongs to absolutely no one. It is, by any modern measure, doing remarkably little with the opportunity. It seems content with that. Then, almost without announcing itself, the sky begins its slow negotiation with morning. Nothing changes that you could point to. The village is still dark. The fields are still shapeless. The stars are, if anything, showing off a little, as though aware their time is limited and determined to make the most of it. But somewhere far beyond the horizon, out past anything the village can see, the sun has already started its commute, and the darkness, grudgingly, the way darkness always does this particular negotiation, has begun handing over the night. The last embers in the hearth are nearly finished now. They have guarded the cottage faithfully through another full shift, asking for nothing beyond a few logs the evening before, which feels, all things considered, like a remarkably fair exchange. Outside, dew gathers on every blade of grass with great ceremony, and spiderwebs stretch invisibly between hedgerow branches, waiting for the first proper light to reveal exactly how much engineering went into them overnight. The spiders presumably already know. They rarely advertise. The village remains asleep, almost. In one cottage the baker has already lit his oven for the second time this telling, because medieval England runs largely on people getting up before everyone else, and quietly making sure the rest of the day has something to eat. He strikes flint against steel, once, twice, and on the third attempt the spark finally agrees to cooperate, which is roughly the national average. The flame catches, modest and unimpressed with itself, and another small miracle gets underway with absolutely no fanfare whatsoever. Nearby, an elderly shepherd opens one eye, considers the ceiling, and decides the sheep can wait another minute. They have, after all, never once started the day without him, mostly because sheep are not known for their initiative. His dog reaches the identical conclusion roughly half a second later. One eye open, the room confirmed peaceful, eye closed again. Between the two of them, this is widely regarded as a perfectly responsible morning routine. A single bird starts singing somewhere above the rooftops. Just one, testing the silence the way a person might clear their throat before a speech nobody asked for. Nothing answers for a long moment. Then another voice joins from somewhere past the churchyard, then another, until the chorus is fully underway and entirely unbothered by the fact that no one organised it, scheduled it, or frankly requested an encore. The eastern sky begins changing in earnest now. first a deep blue easing toward grey, then the faintest suggestion of gold along the horizon, as though dawn is testing colours before committing to one. The village stirs accordingly. A door creaks somewhere. A latch lifts. Smoke begins climbing once more from chimneys that only just finished resting. The baker opens his shutters and sets the night's loaves out to cool, filling the lane with the kind of smell that requires no marketing whatsoever. Across the green, the blacksmith breathes his forge back to life, and the first tap of hammer on iron drifts out into the cool air. Not loud, not urgent, simply present, the way it will be for most of the day, whether anyone is listening or not. Out in the fields the shepherd moves his flock toward fresh pasture. The sheep show no greater interest in being part of history this morning than they did yesterday, and continue grazing with the same magnificent indifference they have brought to every sunrise since the beginning of recorded time. There may be a lesson in that. There is almost certainly not one the sheep intend to share. Children begin appearing in doorways with the specific energy reserved for people who have had a full night's sleep and no responsibilities yet assigned to them. Within minutes the lane has been quietly converted into a kingdom, a battlefield, and at least one extremely convincing dragon's lair, depending on which child you ask. A puddle near the well becomes an irresistible hazard despite an unbroken multi-generational campaign against muddy boots. Some traditions evidently are simply load-bearing. Smoke rises from a dozen chimneys now. Laundry stirs in the morning breeze. A woman pinches fresh rosemary from the garden for the day's cooking, while her neighbour kneels to pull weeds from a tidy row of onions, neither one remotely aware that someone, 800 years from now, will find this morning worth getting out of bed for. History, as a rule, prefers kings, battles, and the occasional dramatic coronation. It rarely bothers itself with bread, weeding, or geese with opinions, which is, in its own quiet way, a shame, because the overwhelming majority of people who ever lived never stood near a throne or a battlefield. They simply woke early, worked honestly, ate something simple, argued cheerfully about nothing in particular, and went back to sleep planning to do it all again tomorrow. This village has been doing exactly that for longer than anyone here can remember, and shows no sign of stopping for our benefit. You take one last look along the lane before it slips away from you. The timber-framed cottages, the lazy curl of smoke, the church tower keeping its usual quiet watch over a village that has never once asked for the attention. A cart rolls toward the fields. Two neighbours pause to exchange a few words about absolutely nothing important and carry on, satisfied. Nothing here asks to be remembered, and yet, somehow, here you still are. The hammer fades first, then the bird song, then the sheep, then the bell, blending gently into something closer to memory than sound. The lane curves between the hedgerows. The cottages disappear. The church tower lingers a moment longer before the trees finally take it too. Only the fields remain, the same fields that welcomed this morning and will go on welcoming everyone after it, with or without an audience. Long after this particular fire has burned down, another will be lit. Long after this particular baker has finished kneading, another will start. The rhythm doesn't need permission to continue, and it has shown no interest in asking for any. That, perhaps, is the quietly stubborn comfort history keeps offering, if you let it. Kingdoms come and go, but somebody, somewhere, is still getting up early to light an oven nobody thanked them for yesterday either. The village fades from view now, not because it has gone anywhere, but because it no longer requires your supervision to keep doing exactly what it has always done. It feels somehow less like leaving and more like simply closing a door behind you. And as another unremarkable, entirely ordinary morning settles in over medieval England, your own quiet visit here comes gently, unhurriedly to its end.